And we return here for round three of the Denker and Haring tournaments. For those of you who are just joining us, you may be wondering, what is the Denker? What is the Haring? We have a graphic for you to help you understand what these events are because they are prestigious American events. Jennifer, the Denker for the Tournament of High School State Champions, high schoolers, and the Haring Tournament of Girls State Champions from K to 12. Both of them are such fantastic events.
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite events. I mean, especially this year with it online. Of course, there's things we miss about that, but we had such strong players in both events, and it's fantastic to see our top young players competing for college scholarship awards, which really drives home one of the big things we try to do here at US Chess and chess promoters in general, which is emphasize you can be a great student and a grandmaster. And just to embarrass you, Robert, you ended up going to a little school in Connecticut, right? So you definitely epitomize that college and chess excellence as well.
Well, I tried my best, and these events are not possible without the support of so many patrons, and those patrons can include you. Please feel free if you are able to, and you would like to donate to the U.S. Chess Federation. It's a 501c3. It is a tax-deductible donation, so that more events can be put on, especially during a time like this. There is definitely a strain on financial resources. So, as you can, please do so. Otherwise, just enjoy the chess. We have so much entertainment coming your way in the form of a number of great games, including the one I have on screen right now, Christopher Shen with the white pieces taking on Nico Cheka. And Jennifer, we're at the point in the tournament, round three, where the gap is closing in terms of the rating differential between the players. And Grandmaster Nico Cheka is already facing a very strong opponent in his CYS username of Christopher Shen.
Oh boy, this is going to be a fun one. Nicholas Cheka has had a relatively easy time of it so far. He had a very relaxed positional win in, I think, both of the games, definitely the last game. So I gotta really feel like that's a great situation for him here. 3 rounds a day, we're going to see players who had longer, more intense games potentially falter a little bit, but I think Nicholas is going to play great this game. But that said, let's look at the position. Knight to h4. I'm not that familiar with the Slav. I haven't played it since I was a little kid. So this looks a little weird to me, sticking the bishop on e6 when you have a pawn on e7. But on the other hand, now the knight on h4 is not very good. Who do you like playing in these positions, Robert?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is that I see the CM title, and that always gets me by surprise because I never share CM as a young kid who won the award at one of the Pan Am tournaments. But I looked and saw that Christian is a FIDE master, and he just has had this username for a while. So clearly his title is not as up to date as his chess skills. However, to answer your question, this move knight b to d2 on move 4 for white is pretty rare. And the point is to defend the pawn on c4 right away, potentially play b3 and develop the bishop via fianchetto on b2. And after bishop f5, knight h4, and black plays g6, you made a great point. Bishop on e6 looks awkward sitting in front of the e7 pawn because the bishop can't develop. That's why the bishop is going to develop out to g7. And I think that Christopher is taking the strategy, Jennifer, and you can correct me if you think I might be wrong, is just not to allow any of these complicated lines where black takes on c4 and plays b5 to keep that extra pawn. Instead, this is like the most solid setup imaginable. And I think he's going for safe and sound rather than anything risky.
Yeah, very solid indeed. And this is going to be a very good one to watch. What else do we have on the top boards? We've got Praveen, who's also been quite impressive so far. And he's playing against Mate Schmate. And we've got this Petrov's defense, which is incredibly popular at the elite level as well, with this interesting decision for white to allow knight takes c3, double his own pawns, and open that d file. Very odd at first glance for the amateur player because you're violating 2 rules in this opening, right? You're first of all creating double pawns, and you're also capturing to the side as opposed to the center. But the logic is that white's actually going to get a lot of pressure on that d file when they queenside castle, and that this foursome of pawns next to the king, which is going to end up moving to b1, is actually a way to prevent potential attacks from black. So it ends up becoming a very strong shield.
1 second as I
Sorry.
have all these. No, you're totally fine. I have a million games going on at once. I'm trying to find that one. You you follow everybody, which means sometimes you follow nobody. And I'm just looking for that game desperately. I know the usernames, but I have too many open. And it's like, oh, there it
Yeah,
is. It's all the way
I
at the
just
bottom.
I
I
just
found it.
figured our brilliant audience could follow blindfold what I meant in the Petrov.
Oh, of course. Petrov theory, everybody knows that. Fabiano Caruana's taught everybody, hey, this is how you play the Petrov from black. And I'm going to start from the beginning. And Jennifer, if you don't mind, you can sort of repeat some of these points just because we now have a visual.
Yes, that's right. Well, I was mentioning that when you castle queenside, you actually get that rook on the half open file. So the whole idea of double pawns is that they create a weakness for the end game, but actually in the middle game, they also create open lines for your pieces. So it's really a pro-con situation, and it's not at all clear that the cons outweigh the pros, particularly in this situation where you also have a very strong shield on your, well, king side.
Yes, that's a very important point because so many people see double pawns and they immediately, they're like, no, can't have double pawns. But it does open up lines. And if you look at the queen on d8, just look at two pieces here, the queen on d8 and the queen on d2. The queen on d2 has more control of the d file than does the queen on d8 because it's staring right into the pawn on d6. So you get to see pieces have a fuller length of a file when you have a situation like this with an early d takes c3, because if black tries to play d5, when white castles, the rook on d1, the queen on d2 are staring right down at the pawn. So that's why the pawn is sitting on d6 and will not push to d5 anytime soon.
And who do you prefer playing in these positions, Robert?
Is my opponent Fabiano Caruana, or am I just playing a casual game of Blitz online? That will change my answer. I always prefer playing from the white side of these kind of positions because although I have double pawns, I think the king safety is quite natural for white when you castle long, as you were saying, and black has the tougher decision on which side to castle. You can play moves like bishop g4 or bishop to e6, queen d7, and castle queenside, or black can castle kingside, in which case you may be walking into an attack. So it's not the easiest decision for black to make, whereas white is happy to just castle long and ask questions later.
Meanwhile, let's try to find some of the top boards in the women's event as well. Now, Jen Yu did draw her game in the second round, right? So she's no longer on the top boards. In fact, it's now Annie Wang and Martha who are on boards 1 and 2. And let's see who they're playing. Well, the Happy Farmer is playing against Chess Parakeet. If you can try to find that game, we can take a look at it.
Okay, so I went to Jennifer's just to flash the game on the screen because she has 1.5 points. She needs to start winning games so she doesn't fall too far behind the leaders. As long as she stays within a half point, eventually, if she keeps winning and the others keep winning, they will play head to head, in which case she controls her own destiny. So let me grab
And by the way, she's playing against the PA representative, Gracie Persona. So that's my rep. I'm from Philadelphia. And yeah.
Uh-oh. You have somebody who shares your name and somebody who shares your home state. Which of these two players do you root for?
Oh, actually, this is Annie, not Jen, right? The Happy Farmer. This is the Happy Farmer.
I'm going to Happy Pawn on Jennifer. And sorry, we saying
Oh, you're on the Happy Pawn. I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. The Happy Pawn versus Rookmate, but Rookmate is somebody different. Rookmate is Aparna Yalamaruja, who's from Texas.
So, okay, now I know you're rooting for Jennifer. Question is rescinded. Can move on to the game between Annie and, the PA state representative.
Yes, Chess Parakeet. And I am a huge fan of Jen Yu. But that said, I also, I feel like my tendency is often to root for the underdog. So I'm certainly not rooting against any of their opponents either. So let's take a look. You do have that game up between Annie and the Chess Parakeet. So another Slav we have on tap. And it looks like the move E5 was just played by Chess Parakeet, which is a really useful move to play. Now, if you're white here, how do you resolve the situation in the center? Because, you could take on E5, you could play D5, or you could just let it be.
I think I let it be. And because the tension, when you look at how to either capture or be captured or push away from the trade, you want to see how it may benefit you. If you play pawn to D5, while I like that, I'm putting some pressure on the c6 square, I don't like that I'm giving up the c5 square. And let's say after d5, not only can this knight go into c5, perhaps black can play a move like e4 and push forward and open up this bishop on d6 to put real pressure on this pawn on h2 and try to take advantage of some of the dark squares. So I would not play d5 as white. I think I can eliminate that. Bishop b2 was just played, and I think ultimately that's what I would have chosen as well, because taking on e5 would have left white with these isolated pawns on the queen side, which are not the worst thing in the world, but I wouldn't commit to that just yet. So Annie doesn't, and she just plays bishop to b2.
Yeah, well, keeping the tension is something that a lot of great players do. The funny thing is, Robert, that it's like when you just start out at chess, you don't really know how to approach things. And then when people get to be good chess players, they tend to want to force things because they understand that forcing moves is a way to win your opponent's pieces and get checkmate. So that's great. But then to get from good to great, you need to go back and train yourself not to always make the forcing moves. Yeah. So the reason is that is so challenging is because that's what got you to where you were to be really good, and you almost have to unlearn parts of it. But yeah, it's bishop b2, nice move by Annie. And of course now connecting the rooks, she'll plan to stick a rook. Where do you say, like, your top two squares for the rook on a1 and f1?
Yeah, because you're essentially asking, well, there's so many options. You can put a rook on b1, that's a semi-open file. You can bring the f rook to e1 or to d1 and this a rook to c1. And I think it's really dependent on black's move right now. Because if black takes on d4 and I take back with my pawn, I may want to stick a rook on e1 just to compete for the open file. But if black plays e4, which forces me to move my knight away to d2, then I wouldn't want to put a rook on e1 just because it feels like I'm looking into a clogged line. So black sort of has the option of how to continue here, and that choice of pawn tension, by the way, was thrown right back to black. She does take on d4, Jennifer. So we're talking about leaving the pawn tension. I think that black couldn't afford to leave it like white could, because how are you going to develop your c8 bishop and your a8 rook if not for first taking on d4?
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And now after e takes d4, you're where are you moving the knight? I guess f8.
Yeah, just rerouting to f8. Not the prettiest position because black still has less space, but there are no clear weaknesses. And I think that's very important. The pawn on b7 defended, the pawn on f7, g7, h7, all safe and sound. So white's position is better because you have two pawns that are more advanced than any of black's. And this bishop on b2 is one that I think can become a monster in the future. But for now, it seems like black's position is stable. And so if you can finish that development off, your advantage may not be so significant.
And thanks everybody to contributing in the chat. We have some interesting comments, including one from FM Michigan Eagle, who says, "Why is everyone so freaking happy in this tournament?" Referring to the fact that we've got two of our top seeds in the National Girls Tournament of Champions, aka the Haring, are the Happy Farmer and a Happy Pawn. Hey, chess makes you happy. And for those of you who missed it earlier, Annie Wang created the account The Happy Farmer because she wanted to call herself the Jolly Rancher. This was when she was a kid. And she figured, hey, instead of jolly, happy, instead of rancher, farmer. And here we are many years later, and still an homage to her favorite candy.
It makes me laugh every time you say it because I think it's such a clever thing, and that kids do that so regularly where they're impressively clever like that. And just using the synonyms, it's a good way to come up with your username.
Yeah, I love it. It's true. These kids and teens are just, they're so intelligent and multifaceted. Yeah, I love to see it, and it's so fun getting a chance to comment on this tournament. So thanks to everybody who made it happen. By the way, speaking of people who made it happen, one person who was very instrumental in this was Dwayne Barber. He is the Dean of Scholastic Chess at US Chess. Also, of course, the namesake of the Barber Tournament of K8 Champions, which will take place next weekend. And he said that he wanted us to mention that Nicholas Cheka is actually the first grandmaster to play in the Denker. Wow, that actually surprises me because so many strong players have played in the Denker, Robert. I'm actually surprised by that. I guess a lot of them played the Denker and then probably a year later they got their last norm. as indeed Dwayne also mentioned that 15 Denker participants went on to become grandmasters.
I was about to think about how this would work because part of it is not that many people become grandmasters in high school. So that's first and foremost. And Nico Cheka with an impressive accomplishment. And then when people do become grandmasters, they often do not play in these tournaments just because then I mentioned this earlier, you become the favorite, you're the target. If you win, oh, okay, it was expected that the grandmaster won. If you don't win, well, what's wrong with you? You're not as good as there is some of that kind of naysayer criticism that comes with being the top seed. And no matter what the field is, no matter how old you are, that's what just happens when people kind of root against the top seed. So I think that it makes sense that there wouldn't be too many grandmasters to play in the Denker. I think it is awesome that Nico Cheka is taking part, and especially during a time like this where maybe during a non-pandemic time you have something else going on. Especially now, it's like, well, hey, it's a great event. There are other strong competitors. Nico is the favorite by rating, but we talk about Praveen. We'll talk about Speed of Light. There's another international master with a great username in the tournament. So I think that it's not nothing's clear in terms of who is going to finish at the top of this. And even somebody like Carissa Yip, who lost her first game, can come back with win after win.
And these prizes, Robert, I think they've increased and they're actually going to continue to increase. So that also might be a reason why it keeps getting stronger and stronger. And this year in particular, yes, the prizes are a little lower than they're going to be next year when it's a live event. But consider the fact that it's a 2-day event and you don't have to travel. Your parents don't have to travel with you. This is a really generous scholarship fund. Considering everything. And I just love to see it. I love to see these great players get to pick up a little money for their efforts. You know, one of the things that makes me happiest is when I see chess players get money, because it's a difficult life for these kids. Of course, are not all going to become professional chess players, but they do need the money for college and to continue playing chess at a high level. That takes money. Let's face it. You got to go to the tournaments. You got to pay your coaches. There's equipment, and we've got 2K prizes, and the Denker, the Barber, the Rockefeller, and the Haring, $1,000 in the Senior. And also look at all these runner-up and third place prizes. You mentioned the Ursula Foster prize as well. Just love to see some great chess players coming home with some moolah as well as some memorable games.
Certainly. And it's a great opportunity for these players during a difficult time. So we're certainly appreciative of all the efforts from the sponsors, the organizers, the players, and it is really a fantastic event. And you mentioned, fun usernames. We have a chess parakeet. I really like Avocado Iris. I think that it's really funny and it's really direct. You know that Iris likes avocados, because otherwise, what could be the rationale for that username? I'm going to bring up the board here because it is a Sicilian. And I just noticed that it is Black's move here when this bishop on b3 is attacked several times. So an interesting moment here for Black to decide, do I take on b3 right away? In which case, White will take back with the c pawn and go rook to c1 and try to take over some of the light squares. Or do I leave this tension, because often Black wants White to take on e6 so you can take back with the f pawn and shore up the d5 and f5 squares. So would you take on b3 or sort of leave that tension? We talked about pawn tension. This is some bishop tension here.
Yeah, great bishop tension. Would I take on b3? That's a great question. I think I would be inclined. Normally, it looks like it's great to have a chance to double the pawns, but I'm very concerned that if I take with a knight on b3, yeah, I think I would. I think I'd take with the knight on b3.
Yeah, I think I would as well, because the bishop on e6 covers the d5 and f5 squares for now, and so it also potentially harms White's pawn structure. And it takes a bit of time for White to really press forward in the position. So ultimately, I do agree with you, Jen, is I would take on b3 with the knight, and then I don't know what next. We play h6 and try to kick his bishop. But the worst possible thing, and I'm going to force this to happen, let's say knight b3, pawn takes, h6, bishop f6, bishop f6. And even here, knight c4, bishop takes c4, queen c4, just forcing everything off the board. What is possible in lines like this is a bad bishop against a good knight. Now here the pawn on c4 is hanging, so it doesn't quite work. I just wanted to show a visual of how these Sicilian positions can get bad for black with a knight coming into a light square on d5 and a bishop on the dark square that can't compete with it. Here the pawn c4 is hanging, so it doesn't quite work. But just look for these kind of ideas, right, Jennifer? You mean how many Sicilian games have we seen enter a queenless position with a good knight against a struggling bishop?
Yeah, I just love that. Love that setup for the white pieces. And by the way, how do you feel about avocados, Robert?
Oh, of course I like avocados. I think they're overrated because people obsess over them and then put them on Instagram nonstop. But I do like avocados. I had avocados just yesterday. Uh, it's just they're enjoyable. They're good, and I can't. Do you like avocados?
Oh God, yes. And I'm so grateful for them because it's the first green thing that my son liked. But you're right. That makes a very good point though, that just because something is overrated doesn't mean it's not awesome. I think that gets lost sometimes. People think if something's overrated and it's bad. No, 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 no. It just means that it's fantastic, but not as fantastic as some people think it is. So
yeah, because instead of being just a food, it's a photo opportunity, right? And now it's a username on chess.com. It's been taken, and too much has been done with the avocado, and especially avocado toast. I mean, are you kidding me? Paying $12 or whatever it is for an avocado toast brunch? That is just, I mean, that's crazy. You know how easy it is to make avocado toast? You put your toast in the toaster, you cut up an avocado, you put the avocado on the toast. It doesn't take much time or effort. So,
oh. Aye. Hey, but Robert, aren't you a millennial? You're supposed to love avocado toast.
I like avocado. I like toast. I like making it myself instead of going out to restaurants and paying for it and Instagramming how nice my avocado toast looks. Oh, sorry to take us away, but I just see a game on the corner of my eye. Tanky 97, if I'm not mistaken, that's Rochelle Wu.
That's right. Ooh.
The black pieces against Charisse, if I'm remembering correctly.
Charisse Woods, yes.
He had an upset victory in the second round, and this looks really bad for white.
No, this is untenable. I mean, is white up like a million pieces here? It looks like the material's equal, Robert. No, wait. Black's actually up a pawn. Black's up a pawn for this position. No, this is not going to work out. Knight g1 was just played attacking the rook on f3, but I believe you can take that pawn on f4 with either the bishop or the rook. Actually, I would probably choose the rook because if you take with the bishop, then maybe there's something like queen move and the rook on f3 is trapped. Although I'm kind of guessing black is doing well there too. But yes, just a simple rook to f4 seems like a winner.
Yeah, and the queen's going to get in the light squares, trying to deliver some kind of checkmate. This knight can come into e3. Now, this looks really bad. And I recognize the opening by the pawn structure. It was a closed Sicilian. I am somebody who grew up playing the closed Sicilian, and I was made fun of for it. And I honestly, regret it. I don't regret many things in life, but playing the closed Sicilian is one of them because the amount of times I had tough positions strategically that I wasn't able to work through. And if we go back through this game, just to show what's happened here, white just develops pretty naturally, but black is in no danger whatsoever. It's like a dream Sicilian where structurally you're safe and sound, tactically you're fine, and this knight comes to d4. The stunt double eventually will come to c6 after the trade on f3, and actually the knight didn't even come to c6 just yet. Black put f5, put a bishop on b7. I mean, it's a dream come true position for black. All the space in the world, natural development, no weaknesses. Not a big fan of the closest Sicilian anymore.
But Robert, at least if it's one of your biggest regrets in life, then you've had a pretty good life so far.
It's I try to live my best life, right? YOLO, as they say. But the closest Sicilian has been the bane of my chess existence in my previous years. So I'm definitely happy to no longer play it from the white side.
Okay, so I was thinking about the position now. So if rook to f4 and bishop g3, what happens?
By the way, I'm just going to go back just quickly to move 17. After e takes f5, Rochelle did find a beautiful shot with d4, an intermezzo, because white stole a pawn on f5, thinking black would recapture, Instead, d4 is played to hit this bishop on e3 with a tempo, and after bishop f2, because you can't play bishop b7, as I take on e3, hitting the queen. After bishop 2, then I take on f3, shattering White's pawn structure. So that was actually really nice vision, alertness by Rochelle. And sorry, going to the game position because it's a problem for White. What were you saying, Jennifer? Sorry about that.
Oh, what happens if rook f4, bishop g3? I just thought it might be kind of cool to show that line, because everything is like in take.
Yeah, I mean, I guess even rook takes f1, right? Just
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, but I thought it'd be fun to show that line. Yeah.
oof. Bishop is hitting the queen on c7, but now the bishop on h6 is hitting the queen on d2, and everything is hanging in a position like this. So it looks like black is the one who happily escapes up material.
Yeah, nice. So wait, so here after rook takes f1, let's play queen takes h6.
Okay. And multiple good. I'm even thinking queen takes g3 here. That may be too much. Rook takes g1 check, giving up my rook because my rook is hanging on f1, and so is my queen on c7. So I need to protect some of my pieces. And well, queen takes g3. I'm saying because if the pawn g3, rook takes e1. Black has two rooks and two pawns for a queen, and this king on h1 is less safe than the counterpart on g8. So it should be just a matter of time before black wins this game.
Yeah, I think that maybe Charisse will go for this though, because it seems like, I mean, it's not that hopeful, but at least there are some things that Black maybe has to calculate, unless there was something even more convincing. But really, really nice start for Rochelle then. I mean, if she goes on to win this game, she'll have that big 3-0 score to kick off her event. And don't forget, she is a former champion of this event, so she's no stranger to being on that podium and grabbing gold.
She's a very dangerous player. I remember commentating in the U.S. Junior Girls event last year where she put together several wins in a row. Maybe it might even 4 or 5, if I'm remembering correctly. So she can be quite streaky in a good way, taking down some of her tough competitors. And here, Charisse has had a great start to the day. I think the conclusion will not be quite as happy as the start, but still, 2 out of 3 for her is a really good performance because she did land an upset victory in the second game.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, and it looks like, where is Alice Lee? Wasn't she 202? I want to find her at some point, but I know that, speaking of point, Alice Lee is Power of a Point, which is another great name. On Chess Kid, they have like just the greatest names, and they're all just like automatically generated. It's truly amazing. Right? They could just give you like the like flying, like so just crazy stuff like flying cereal, and it's always like so fun and colorful, and it's all like just all AI generated.
Yeah,
Because privacy things, they want to kind of give you a name that's unrecognizable, but it's also fun.
yeah, no, I really like those kind of creative and fun usernames. And Power of a Point, it gets the message across, right? She wants the full point, and I guess she has the power to get the full point. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. I have no idea, honestly. I don't know why she created the username, but Jennifer you brought her to our attention here. She has the black pieces. I would say that I don't particularly love her position at this point.
And I thought she was going to get paired up this round, and I was wrong. She must have been right on that bubble. Instead, it seemed like she is playing Amanda Losov. So Losov is Pillsbury Vine 10. She's the DCC representative. And yeah, I mean, looks like she's playing a great game so far with the white pieces.
Yeah, because her username has bind, and this position is starting to look like a bit of a bind, as white has this beautiful pawn chain from f2 to c5, reinforced by the b4 pawn at the end point here. And so more space for white. The rook on h1, it looks like it could land an attack. Not really. You only have one rook here, so I wouldn't actually be focused on attacking black, but instead perhaps castling or maybe bishop d3, king to e2, keeping the king in the center and jetting that rook over to the queen side eventually. So I just think that with the knight on c6 under attack already, black needs to figure that out. And if the knight stays there, there could be a potential for b5 or even bishop to b5 to keep applying pressure on the c6 square. And I have to imagine that white's position is preferable at this point.
Yes, and for those of you who are just joining us, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. This is the 2020 U.S. Chess Invitationals, and today we've got the Denker Tournament of High School Champions and the Haring Tournament of Girls State Champions. I think we're going to go on a quick break and get back in here for some more action with round 3, which is a very critical round. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our show. I'm Jennifer Shahadi, and I'm with Grandmaster Robert Hess. We're going to get right back into the action, but I also wanted to let you know that if you can make a donation to U.S. Chess Today, it is a 501c3. You can also join or renew your membership. That's very valuable as well, to stay part of our community. And big news is that our August cover actually has Robert Hess on it. Did you even know that, Robert?
Wait, what?
Yeah, to be fair, there's like 40 people on the cover. It's a beautiful cover of.
Well, I'm on it, so it can't be that beautiful.
Well, you are a little bit small. You are a little bit small. Hikaru's face is the biggest, and then Alexandra Votez. But it's about the chess boom and streamers. So yeah, and they got 40 different streamers on the cover, maybe 45, something like that. And yeah, it's really beautiful. It sounds like 45 would be hard to design in a way to make that work, but the photographer and the artist, the designer, the design team, we have like some incredible skills, and they really made it work. So yeah, look out for that, Robert.
Well, I will certainly be on the lookout for my small face, kind of dwarfed by Hikaru and Alexandra. Sounds like you're really drawing me in here. But no, on a serious note, it is great to be part of this great chess boom. And most of what I do is, of course, on the chess channel. I am going to start streaming more on my own personal channel as well. But there's been a lot of chess action throughout this pandemic, which really, I mean, honestly, it's been a tough time for so many. And I've received plenty of messages saying, thank you. It's making it easier for me just to be able to watch the chess and enjoy and to learn. So I'm appreciative, and I think many are, of how chess has been booming throughout this period of time that is so difficult for so many.
And I think so many people are excited to hear that you're going to be streaming more often in your personal channel. So, yeah, you've been getting a lot of subs today. I think on break, there were a bunch that were gifted. Gosh, what was the guy's name who was gifting you all those subs? I can't remember right now, but yeah, it's really nice to hear that, Robert. And are you going to be like playing Blitz and commenting on it, or?
I don't know. Normally, I like just commentating events because for me personally, playing Blitz, it forces me to be entertaining in ways that aren't so natural. And so we'll see. I haven't figured out my exact plan of action, but I do plan to be a little bit more involved here on my own personal channel. Of course, you can always find me on Twitch. If there's a chess event going on, the chances are very high that I will be covering it. And so there, I'm never too far away. Let's put it that way.
Can't spell work ethic without has. That's what everybody says, right?
That's a new one. I'll take it. I actually like that. Maybe I'll steal it, but appreciate it, Jennifer. It's been fun. And of course, you've been a large part of the boom too, with the St. Louis Club and just all the work you've been doing with US Chess, US Chess Women. And so, I don't know. I can't come up with, you can't spell something without Jennifer Shahadi, but whatever it is, it's well deserved on your part.
I'm sure the chat will think of something fun. By the way, the oppressor asks if I'm a pro poker player. I am an ambassador for Poker Stars, so you could have seen me on some poker shows in the past. But let's pop right back into the action as we've got some great games. Where do you want to go, Robert? There's so many different places to go. You know what? Maybe Martha's game, because we haven't looked at it yet, and she is our defending champion on a perfect score.
Okay, I did just see results, so I'll go to those results really quickly.
Okay, sure.
And then we'll head to Martha's game. I see that Rochelle Wu did in fact win the game, by a checkmate. And actually, the line that we were talking about with you called it, with knight g1, rook f4, bishop g3. So everything we were talking about did happen with the queen sacrifice on g3. And so it seems like the game concluded quite a few moves were played because knight e3 check, the king can't go to f2 or to h2 because knight g4 check, and otherwise the knight is lost on g1, so the king went back to h1, and then the knight came to g4 anyway, and the second rook came in and delivered this checkmate. Yikes.
Tough game for Charis. If I remember correctly, she had one of the longer games last round, and that is tough to play 3 games, especially when your second one is really long. So I feel like we're going to see more great things from her tomorrow.
We certainly will. And another result that I just saw at the corner of my eye is Zefkat. She wins her game with the black pieces, and she's up a full rook and 2 pawns at the end of this. So that is a good win for her. She does stream, and that is Sarah Herman. She wins with the black pieces against Melissa Saracen.
Yeah, and she had a tough game last round, I believe. So that's nice. I think she'll be on 2 out of 3 again.
That's right.
Well, again, that doesn't make any sense. But I think what I was trying to say is +1 again.
Right. I knew what you meant. I got you. And you wanted to go to Martha's game, so let's go there right now. I'm pulling it up here. And whoa, okay, this is complicated. So while I have a moment to catch up, Jennifer, what is going on in this position?
Oh gosh, well, that bishop looks really nice on a3, hitting the pawn on d6. And note that actually the knight on d3 is pretty sweet as well, because if the knight on d7 were to move, knight takes e5 would be a nice little tactic. So material is equal. It looks like I really like Martha's position. Unless we can get something like knight c5 in to try to arrange some trades of White's powerful pieces. I somehow don't think that's going to work out that great. I still think no matter what, White's going to have an advantage here. Yeah,
because even if you can get knight c5, I'll probably take it with the bishop and then give you this bad bishop on e7. Right now, knight c5 doesn't work because it's
right
pawn on e5, but let's pretend that pawn wasn't even falling and make some other move, like h4 or g4, something. The point is that this knight is better than this bishop when they're all 8 pawns for both sides here. like that bishop wants open diagonals, not a clogged position, and the knight can hop over the pawns, and that's typically why a knight can be better than a bishop in endgame. Plus the fact that the knight can go from color complex to color complex.
And Marie Valea is Blue Queen 20 from Washington, and I don't like her position here, but I know she's gonna fight it out. But Martha has just been very impressive. I mean, remember that was the 3 pawns versus a piece game last round. For those of you who weren't here when I mentioned it earlier, Martha is also a member of the Unruly Queens, which is a group of 4 who put on charity events and encouraging events for girls. So I'm a big fan of her work on and off the board, and nice to see her doing well.
Certainly, and it's good to see both familiar faces in Martha and some of the up and comers, maybe players who you haven't heard as much about because they may have a little bit lower ratings. And for Anne Marie, she's still a strong player, of course, 2,100. She's a chance in this tournament, and she needs to figure out the right way forward in this game because the position is one that Jennifer, I think people often assume that when queens are on the board, the positions are the most complicated. In my opinion, this position is one of the most complicated positions you can get, and in fact, a very instructional one because it's not about this move. It's not about move 17 for black. So, what are the concepts, the underlying positional opportunities here for both sides? Is white trying to place for c5? Is white trying to play g4? Is white trying to play h4, h5? Is black trying to play f5 or maybe play f6 to reinforce this e5 pawn to play knight c5? Is black trying to play b6 to stop c5 or does that give the c6 square? All of these questions must be asked and answered. And in a game with 53 and 51 minutes respectively for the players, it's really hard to do so despite it seeming like they have all the time in the world.
I love the idea of if you get b6, knight b4 to c6, that looks really juicy indeed. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of that one. But yeah, black needs to figure out what to do in this position. It's very dicey. She's just played a move. She's played rook to c7. Okay, let's see. What to do now is white. Something strikes me slightly off about rook to c7. I can't put my finger on it though.
Yeah, is the idea of rook f to c it? I guess that would be the intention. But then what after that? The pawn on c4 is so well defended, and the rook on c1, very importantly, is extremely well defended. So it's not like you're pinning my pawn and playing for b5. So I wonder what black's next move is going to be.
And from white's point of view, I could try to open another flank. You've been mentioning the move h4. Or I could try to move a move which is maybe not quite as positionally elegant, but it might just be a nice brute force move like f4, because you can't really just hold down that easily. I mean, I guess you could play f6, but then you're literally putting like all of your pawns in the same color as your bishop, which isn't that desirable.
It certainly is not. And white can continue with g4 because black will never take on f4 after playing f6, and the e6 square will be hopped right into. So if white does play f4, if black's going to take, you have to do it immediately. And of course, the downside of taking on f4 is look at d6, look at d4. These are pawns that are going to be very difficult to keep defended here. So I actually love this position. I think it is so rich. And I'm not saying that white is so much better here, but I do think it's easier to play from white's perspective. Objectively, I think there is a slight pull here for white, and I'm not sure if f4, which I actually move I really like the more that we mentioned it, or h4, g4. At what timing is important, and I'm not sure if I need to strike just now or if I can continue to expand before playing this f4 move.
It's kind of an amazing that the f4, g4, and h4 all look like good moves, Robert. I got to say, that's a sign that the position is pretty good for white.
It certainly is. And it's also one of those positions where you take a lot of time because you're trying to be a perfectionist and you're trying to figure out which pawn do I move forward. Because after h4, is black going to just sit and do nothing, or is black going to play f5, in which case then f4 is not a possibility for white, at least not yet. So that's the one thing that I would be considering from black's perspective is like, can I break with f5? But f5 doesn't really look like it's in tandem with this previous move, rook to c7. Why was rook to c7 played? You could have played f5 right away.
So, one game, Robert, that really looks like a lot of fun is um, Robert's game, who he played such a fantastic game in the round two, and he's now on a perfect score from Southern California. We have Robert Shalayatenko, and he's playing against Pigs on Seventh. And I don't think we've gotten a chance to see too many of Pigs on Seventh games so far.
We haven't, but that's Samrug Narayanan, and what a username that is, Pigs on Seven.
Yeah, that's it. Well, we'll see if he gets a chance to do that in any of his games. And he is the representative from Minnesota. But let's take a look at this game. First glance, I haven't calculated anything. Materials equal, and I'm a little scared for Pigs on Seventh because Robert already looks like he has 4 pieces placed for attack. The knight on h5, the queen on f4, the rook on g3, or right now it's on h3, and the bishop on d3. So first impressions are very positive, but good news, it is Black's move, and he can always take on d3 with check. So now that I've formed some kind of super vague impressions, I guess we should calculate something.
Well, I think impressions are important because it will dictate how you think about the game when you start really going to the weeds here. And one of the issues I'm having from Black's point of view is your move that one of the moves you mentioned, knight takes d3, which looks very normal to get rid of an attacking piece. Then I take with this h rook. And so this h rook isn't just threatening rook to g3, it's trying to help me double along the board's only open file and to create attacking chances. And the back rank issues for the black king on h8 will leave some tactical opportunities available to white that will be quite dangerous, whether it's a sacrifice of a queen to try to deliver a back rank checkmate or just sustaining this pressure. It's not going to be super fun for black to deal with. So
yeah. Just potentially more trades than I would like when I'm the attacker, but I think it might be just enough material to make it very awkward indeed for Black. I just love the way he plays because it in 2 games in a row he's giving us some of the most interesting imbalanced chess of the round, and yeah, it makes it fun for us commentators, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And I want to add that this was a French defense, and the bishop on b7 is the best French bishop you'll ever get, and yet the position is still good for white. So, you know my feelings on the French, not a big fan, and a position like this does not look particularly enjoyable from Black's point of view, where all of white's pieces are aiming towards the king side, and if they're distracted from the king side, well, they'll happily go to the board's only open file. So, of course, Robert's position is better here with the white pieces and a bit ahead on the clock.
By the way, shout out to some of our stars in the chat, including Tatev Abrahamian, who I believe I read is doing commentary for next week's Invitational. So you have that to look forward to. We also actually have your burner account, Robert, because somebody just put in the chat, does anybody else think it's a little suspicious that Robert Hess is so good looking and so good at chess? So I guess you're signed on to your other account on another browser or something.
You know, I see that Mr. Monopoly. I thank you. I wasn't expecting that, but I appreciate it. Oh gosh. Thanks to everybody who's tuning in. Really do appreciate your support and your viewership, and it makes it even more fun for us as commentators. We're already enjoying the chess. And well, Jennifer, actually, I'm getting distracted by the chess, or maybe I'm putting my attention where it should be. But white took with the D1 rook instead of the H rook. That was a really interesting moment to my eyes here, because rook D takes D3 just looks awkward, but I guess the point is somehow to get these rooks both on F3 and G3 for the attack. But it feels off to me.
But there was another trade on D3, and then the move queen to E7 played. Okay, so what's up on rook G3?
Wait, I'm going to take us back before rook takes D3, and I think this is a good lesson on tension. Black wants to take on D3 if that's the trade somehow benefits him, and white doesn't really want to take on D8 because that drags the rook to the open file. So I actually think black should play bishop to A6, simply attacking this rook on D3. But there must have been something available to white, because otherwise, why would Robert take with his rook? There may be some tactics that, okay, this is the most ridiculous thing ever. He was going to take on D8, and if rook takes D8, he's going to play knight takes G7. That was his idea. just ripping the king open for rook g3 and queen f6. What a tactical monster Robert is. Not me, Robert Schlatenko here.
Nice. That is a beautiful line, Robert. So you're saying that if king g7, there's rook g3 check and queen f6 mate, and actually if queen g7, exactly the same thing.
Right.
And those dark squares are just toast, and that's the power of that pawn on e5. Like that's exactly what we're looking for when we play against the French. We always endeavor to get that pawn on e5 and punish you for not controlling the square yourself earlier in the game.
Wow, what a concept there. What a sacrifice. And that must have been why Black took on d3, seeing this knight takes g7, and then playing queen to e7. And, well, you can't play rook d8 anytime soon because the f7 pawn needs defense. And if I'm Robert here, and I am Robert always, but if I'm Robert in this particular game with the white pieces, another thing I'm thinking about is what happens if I trade the queens? I know I want to attack you, and ideally I just checkmate you, but what if I make a simple move like queen to g5 and say, I have control of the board's only open file? Does that favor me enough, or should I keep the queens on the board? What do you think, Jennifer?
I would certainly be inclined to keep the queens on the board, but I totally know what you mean. Like that is an exit strategy. If you're definitely going to be better in that position as well. So I take it that the nice little defensive concept is if rook g3, because you can't play g6. That looks way too weakening. That would allow me to play just queen h6, probably winning on the spot, I think.
That looks really strong, yeah.
I mean, maybe it doesn't quite win on the spot. You do have queen f8, right? But it looks, so maybe I would just start with knight f6. But it looks quite horrible for you.
Yeah.
So the nice thing about having your king on h8 is that after rook g3, you can play rook g8. Like, it looks ugly, but if I don't have any kind of sacrifice here, it might hold up. And so the idea there would be if I play queen g4, you would just continue to defend the pawn without creating weaknesses with queen f8. Yeah, I don't know. It looks so passive. It's hard to imagine that's not good. But why did you reject rook g3? Do you think that is the way for white to go, to just try to pile up on that pawn and then see what we can do?
I sort of visualized this position or something like it, and I was like, I don't actually know how I make progress. And because the other variation where I traded queens, I was like, I see a clear pathway forward, and that can backfire. Sometimes you trade pieces and then you regret it because with the liquidation comes better chances for the worst side to hold. But I look at this position, I'm like, all right, if I give white 3 free moves, and not like knight f6, knight takes rook or anything like that. Now, that's not the type of free moves, but 3 moves that don't actually create immediate threats. What would your 3 moves be with white here?
Well, I'm trying to play like knight f4, h5, and h6, something like that.
Okay, that seems pretty reasonable. So Jennifer's going to remove the knight, play h5, h6. But as soon as you play knight to f4 and h5, maybe then black can play h6 and say, well, I saw your plan, I stopped it, now what?
Yeah, and then I need to play something maybe like rook f3, trying to I can't play rook f3. Sorry, you still have your bishop on b7. Maybe I could try to switch back rook to d3 and see if I can suddenly make something happen again on the d file. But it's right. It seems like you can then play queen e7 and reconfigure your pieces to defend.
Honestly, it's what I'm looking at. And I'm like, wait a second, like this isn't so easy. And that's really why I came to this conclusion of queen g5 being the move. And it may not be objectively switch on the engine. Perhaps there are other moves that are superior to queen g5. I just felt from a practical standpoint that white risks absolutely nothing. Not that white is really risking the other lines, but it makes it harder for black to defend. And sometimes that's the way to win games, is not to just obliterate your opponent with a sacrificial checkmate, but to put your opponent in a position where they really are just shuffling pieces and have no good plans.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, a great intuition that rook g3, rook g8 is totally sufficient. It seemed like that flashed through your eyes quite quickly. And, to me, I really needed to look at that to understand why white has nothing. But, that's the problem with making a lot of trades. Even with the beautiful knight on h5 and the nicely placed queen, we don't have that much fuel to the fire. So it's not that shocking that if black defends well, that we have no mate.
Yeah, that's what was important about this knight takes d3. Your intuition was correct that, at first it looked like white had so many pieces in the attack, but then after knight d3 and trading rooks, you're losing a ton of your firepower. So your arsenal is depleted here. And while white is still going to be better pretty much in any variation that does not hang material or anything of the sort, any sort of standard move that maintains the status quo, white should be better here. It doesn't seem to press forward. It just keeps this kind of slight edge, whereas queen g5 allows me to take firm control of the board's only open line and try to plant a rook on d7 and say, what are you going to do about it? There's really very little that you can accomplish. And I'm sounding more convinced than I really am. I think that black has chances to hold those positions. It just, the thing that sticks out to my mind is really just queen g5, get to the end game, and then push all your pawns however you want.
We also have the speed of light playing one of my very favorite. Well, I thought it was one of my favorite openings because it looks like a dragon, but there's no. It can't really be a dragon, which I should have realized because there's a white pawn on e3, Robert.
Okay.
That's the speed of light versus Brave Horse.
I have that one open, and that is Andrew Zhang, who's Brave Horse, 2,300 U.S. chess rating, and Andrew Hong is black with a 2,533. So a very highly rated matchup here. And knight e4 was just played, and I'm already wondering if that was a blunder. And if knight takes e4, you have to take on g7, and then knight takes f2 intermezzo, hitting the queen.
Yeah, that looks very odd. Knight takes e4. So bishop takes g7, knight f2. What about, I guess there's queen d4 that you have to check.
Oh, nice. Nice find, Jennifer. That's actually a really strong move because now the knight is stuck here. The rook is under attack, and the queen protects this bishop on the long diagonal. Okay.
And e5 could be tried, but just doesn't look very smart because queen d6, yeah.
And f2 is hanging, d7 is hanging, lots of weak squares and pieces. So my first thing of looking for the tactics, it backfired. So now that I realize that, I can take the moves back. The players can't. So we're going to go back to the live position and say, all right, maybe knight takes e4 is, well, it could still be the best, but knight takes f2 as the follow-up is probably not best.
That's a good move then. I mean, because I actually felt like black was better, and I think that more trades will reduce black's advantage. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm just biased towards the dragon position, but I feel like trading off the bishop on g7 will be very nice for white.
I agree. And well, a big question now for black is, you're going to have to trade the dark square bishops regardless, whether you play knight takes e4 or move your knight somewhere else. The bishops are coming off. The question is, do you want the knights to come off as well, or does that help white in that circumstance? Like you can play knight e8, for example, and just try to trade and take on g7, and then keep this knight on e4, where it can be kicked back eventually.
Right, I see what you're saying, but the knight just looks so unfortunate on the g7 square.
Yeah, you don't like to fianchetto your knight, so knight takes e4 does feel more normal, but with the liquidation, I feel like white doesn't really have too much to complain about. Not that black does either, but I assume the higher rated player, the international master, Andrew Hong, with the black pieces, he probably wants to win this game.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, the question is, how many points is it going to take to win, right? 5.5 or 6, potentially.
Mm-hmm. And, there's a grandmaster in the field, the only one in Denker history, as you mentioned, that Dwayne Barber told you about. So if you look at that, I don't want to be down any points if I do play this grandmaster. So these kind of psychological components really impact the players as early as round 3 right now.
It's very difficult because that's what's so intense and creates so much pressure in these classic tournaments. I still remember, I wasn't one of the highest ranked players, but I was up there. I was like maybe in the top 10 when I played in the National High School Championship, and it was really my dream to win the event. And you just need to win all your games. There's no coming back, or maybe you can give up one draw. But I lost a round pretty early in the event, and it's very difficult because there goes your chances. But you still, especially if you're part of a team or if you're playing your games live on Twitch to thousands of people, you still have to find your inner motivation to play even when you have no more chance to win the event. And right now, it's too early to talk about that. But you do often see people just run the scoreboard in these scholastics, win all their games.
You do indeed. And from my experience, when I played in 11th grade in the second round of the tournament, I was playing. So I had 2 grandmaster norms, and I was an international master, and I was playing. I want to say something around a 1900 2000, and I was getting crushed, like totally walloped. My opponent was up 30 or 40 minutes in the clock. My position was terrible, and then all of a sudden, my opponent decided to allow me to sacrifice my queen for two rooks, and I still had a bad position, but the imbalance didn't help his cause, and I eventually won that game. But I remember thinking, oh my gosh, if I lose in round two of this tournament where I'm trying to win first, and that's really the only goal in an event like this, it eats at you during the middle of a game where you're, instead of just playing the board, you're like, I need this result to happen, and you can't just will it into existence. So speaking of results and highly rated players, I think we should pop on over to Nico Cheka's game, because we're already deep down this one into an end game with two knights, two rooks, and 6 pawns each. But I like Black's position here. That's Nico with the black pieces, because his knight is more advanced and he has squares on the queen side, the b4 square, the c5 square for his knight. So Jennifer, it looks like a very pleasant endgame to ensue for Black.
Right, but it's pleasant because of these dynamic factors. So if white can somehow simplify, then a draw could be likely. So it's very important that they find the right sequence now.
True indeed. And so it's White's turn here. I'm trying to figure out the way, because I know that Black's next move is probably knight to c5. And that goes right after this pawn on b3. So I imagine making Luft for the king, that way there are no back rank checkmates, is useful, but knight c5 can still be played, and either white gives up the b3 pawn or control over the d file, and neither is a pleasant option.
Yeah, I really wish I could get away with playing a move like knight d4, rook takes d3, just trade off a bunch of stuff, but you would have knight e2 check there and win in exchange. So maybe instead of making Luft, king f1 to remove your king from that that e2 check.
I guess just knight to c5 though, and this b3 pawn still so weak here.
Yeah, it's true, because you're not going to give me another chance to make that idea come true.
No, and actually
that's a problem. Yeah, it's the b pawn.
There's still a funny back rank checkmate after rook takes d8, rook takes a rook to b1. You think you're protecting your pawn on b3, but I can just take it, because just because your king's in f1 doesn't mean that rook d1 will not be a checkmate. The knight on e2 helps smother the king. Yeah, so it's painful when that kind of stuff happens. You think you're making space for your king, but in reality, the king is still stuck.
Good point. Yeah. Well, I mean, Nico is just really playing great chess, Robert, because he seems like he's getting these great strategic positions that are so fantastic. He's not required to invest as much energy as some of the players with the tactical melees, and that's so important when you're playing so many rounds a day. It really gives you a leg up, and I like to see that.
And I really think it suits his style, because I remember in the U.S. Junior last year where he was playing phenomenally well. He ended up with 7 out of 9, tying for first with the Wonder Liang. I believe it was 7 points. And he honestly looked like he was going to win the event to the very last game. And he just didn't manage. Wonder caught up to him and then won in the tie breaks. But I remember throughout the event, there were these positions with slight advantages. And Nico Cheka, unlike most young players, has no qualms about getting into an end game and grinding you down in that position. So this is actually right up his alley. Whereas some young players are like, whoa, queen's off the board, not too many pieces. That's not for me. He is definitely a student of the end game and loves to just poke and prod and create little weaknesses here and there to secure an advantage.
Yeah, well, let's see if he does it again. It is difficult, and the reason it's difficult is because of that pawn on b3. And it's funny when you play a4, you don't think about so many moves later that's going to be an issue, but this is it. And will it be enough? There's this famous principle of 2 weaknesses, that you need 2 weaknesses to win the game. But the problem is the b3 pawn is actually kind of already 2 weaknesses, because it's the pawn and the square on b4.
Yep.
It's already almost those two.
It certainly is. And actually, White just played that 2 moves ago. So after the trade on g7, White voluntarily played a4. That was not forced, but I can understand why White made it. So stop b5 and kicking the knight out of c4. But I think that a4 while I understand why it was played, it's sort of a regrettable decision. And black was just better in the end game, but the rook's already poised to create problems for white down the open files. And I honestly think this is the problem when you're playing someone who's higher rated than you are, and you go into the game trying to make a draw. I'm not accusing Christopher of this. I don't know him. I don't know what his strategy was, but this just has the look of a position where you're playing someone who's higher rated than you are, and you're like, oh, let's just trade off pieces and I'll hold. And then you realize once the pieces are gone, hey, wait a sec, this ain't so easy anymore.
Absolutely. That is the problem. It's never easy. Let's check in on Pigs on the 7th and Robert, because we really thought that the Pigs game had some very big opportunities for defense, but Robert found another very enticing strategy, and he has complete and utter D-file control right now, which really makes me nervous for Black's position.
Certainly. And instead of queen to g5, as I was trying to clamor for, queen to d4, which makes sense, bishop became to a6, and rook to d2, and rook c8. So black still can't really move. How should white continue, though? That's really the question here.
You mean, well, first of all, you got it. What's going on queen a4?
Okay, hitting the bishop. Behind it is a pawn on a7. That doesn't look so fun. I have to move my bishop probably to b7 or to f1, but to b7, hitting your pawn on g2 in response, I guess.
Yeah, and then I have rook d7, which could be really annoying.
I'm starting to really dislike black's position here. It just seems it's so straightforward. You're creating problems for black, taking up space, you're getting a pig on the 7th here for white, not for black.
Yeah, not fun. And if you play something like queen e8, notice that we often have tempo gaining moves like queen g4, which is really annoying.
Oh, because you're trying to pin this rook to the queen, but you get out of it with a bigger threat, and you still can't play g6 because knight f6 is just ouch. I mean, the queen is under attack, the rook is protected, the knight's helping to threaten checkmates on h7. No, this can't be a reasonable position at all.
No, this looks quite good for white. What do they? I just don't see what they do after queen a4 though. Then like that line just looks overwhelming. Unless we have some kind of tactics. Like no, I don't see it. No. Maybe after like rook d7, b5, and c6. No, because I could do worst case scenario. I could just take on e7.
What if Jennifer? Bear with me for a second. What if the rook d7? I play queen to f8.
Okay, that's probably a better move, yeah. And then if I was thinking that just a frontal attack with queen f4 might be kind of annoying. And queen a4 was played.
Okay, so queen a4 is played. So, gosh, you're just going right after me. What can I do? King g8 is like the only move that I see, but this doesn't look very reasonable.
That looks terrible. I'm like just trying to figure out if I can play knight f6 check right away. Probably not. Probably then you can just take and play king h8. But it's just it looks terrible. It looks so bad.
It does. I mean, I don't advocate for this position.
But you got to do something. And queen a4 was played, so we're likely to see this play out because you're right. Queen f8 makes more sense. At least you're guarding that weak point when my rook isn't part of. It's funny, my rook on d7 then really wants to shift back to like g4 or something like that.
Right. And I'm just going to hover this rook all over the place because you don't know if it wants to go to d7, to g3, g4. And for black, I think maybe bishop f1, even though I don't know what the real difference is. These bishop b7 lines don't look very fun to me. So bishop f1 at least can create some confusion. I guess you go for it, but it seems like black's in big trouble.
Oh, yeah. I think that Robert is going to go to 3-0 this game.
Yeah, it looks like
it. And playing great. I mean, well deserved for sure. If he does indeed get that 3rd point in a row.
Indeed. It's really just looking like he's having a great day of chess. No surprise considering how strong he is, though it's good to see him play chess like this.
And Praveen, let's check in on his game. He playing against Mate Schmate, also both players looking to try to get to 3-0 themselves.
And look at this move by Pravin here. I like what he just did. So bishop b5. His only purpose with this move, well, he's attacking the queen, but black isn't going to blend with the queen, is to provoke c6, which is what happened. And only then did he take on e6. So it looks like you wasted time putting your bishop on b5. But note that pawns never move back. They cannot do so. It's against the rules of chess. So by encouraging this pawn forward, by provoking it there, now the d6 square is more vulnerable. So I really like this decision making by Pravin here with the white pieces.
Yeah, really nice little twist in the position. Queen takes e6 played, by the way.
Mm-hmm. And just drop the bishop back to e2. You have the two bishops advantage. Your king is very safe over there on b1, the d6 square, potential vulnerability. Bishop a4 trying to go to b3. I understand that too. I would prefer to have white here for sure. What about you, Jennifer?
Yes, I agree. I like that. I like the two bishops. So let's go back to Nicholas Cheka's game. Robert, one thing I noticed about this round is I feel like there's more games finished. Some of them aren't super pertinent to the standings or we're distracted by other things, but I feel like more games are ending early. And again, it's that fatigue. You know, the mistakes tend to creep up more when you have multiple rounds in a day in the last round. And players maybe start playing more quickly as well as they're tired. So this game could be over faster than we thought. Because look at how passive white is right now. I mean, black's not up any material. Rook d1, and you're tied in knots.
Yeah, you go rook d1, king comes to e2 to attack the rook. Instead of moving back, you don't want to retreat. You just move to g1 or to h1, create a problem for one of these white pawns at the king side. And as you're saying, white is completely tied down here, and black if they make it b4 next. I don't know how white gets out of this bind.
I don't think they will. No, I mean, this just looks phenomenal for Nicholas Cheka and just so cool to see. I mean, it looks like we're going to have very likely 3-0s in both Nicholas and Robert's games, but they play so differently. So like very opposite, at least today. I can't claim. I'm sure both of them have had both positional and attacking masterpieces, but it will certainly be fun when you see both of them clash swords at some point tomorrow, no doubt.
Yeah, they certainly are very different stylistically. You're correct. Your read is right, Jennifer. And one other thing I want to say about these players being tired is they're probably not used to playing game 70 online. For the last bunch of months, they've probably just been playing Blitz. And it's a totally different game when you're playing with 70 minutes and 10-second increment versus 3-minute chess. You have more time to think, but your opponents also have more time to come up with big chances and with some really hard ideas to counter.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that you probably like I had played some US Chess League games back in the day that were classical games online. But a lot of times certain players would also set up the chessboard so that they could have an alternate view, which I don't think is usually allowed these days. I think it depends on the tournament, but I think the concern would be it would require one more camera angle to make sure people weren't making moves in between, right? As there already are often multiple camera angles involved.
Well, when Jeffrey, sorry to cut you off, Jennifer, but when Jeffrey Zhang played a match against Nikita Vityugov, which I covered with Jennifer Yu, they actually had the camera angles where you could see them, and you could see the board, and they were playing over the board. Of course, they're playing virtually, but they each had their own board to use.
That's really nice. I think that must be really nice because, like, otherwise the eyes could get a little bit tired staring at the screen for so many hours.
For sure.
And also, everybody misses that. So, bringing the pieces back out for some classical games is nice. But a lot of people don't like the efficiency of online and prefer it. I just think the key thing is that they need to get off screens when there are breaks. And that's easier said than done.
And I'm going to bring up one game, speaking of breaks and getting off screen. We will get off screen in a second. I just want to bring up one game because I see the position here where black has an hour and 9 minutes. So the 70 minutes started this game. You get 10 seconds added per move. Black has barely used any time at all. White has used an hour, and white is up a pawn in the king and pawn game and is winning. So it's one of these moments where I do think that um, it goes to show where some players are just not used to this classical format, essentially playing a blitz game when you have so much time on your clock. And Nanji Bear, we saw her play around earlier. She's using her time very wisely, and she is going to get the full point. That's Yili Wen here, as it's a king and pawn in a game now. She'll let king b5, take a second pawn, or king c5, she'll play d6, king d5. She can choose which pawn to go after. But Jennifer, it's not every day you see a game with an hour extra for one player, but also not in a good position.
Yeah, well, sometimes you got to work for those good positions, and here it did pay off. But let's review our schedule as we head to our break. Well, today we are in the final round of play for Saturday's trio of games. Tomorrow it's up again with 3 games starting same times actually, 11 a.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Eastern, and 7 p.m. Eastern, as we look to crown 2 new champions. And I believe Hikaru Nakamura, the one and only, along with Danny Wrench, are going to be called the action for that tomorrow. So you definitely want to put that on your calendar if it's not already.
For sure. And in the meantime, Jennifer and I will take a brief break. When we return, we'll cover the rest of round 3 of the Denker and Haring Tournament of Champions. And we return here with the game of Alice Lee. She has the black pieces in this one against Amanda Losef. And what a day it's been for Amanda, because as I look at this position, Jennifer, I see a pawn on b5, I see a pawn on c6, I see tons of extra space for white, and I see a bishop locked in on c8. So is it as good as it looks, or am I just maybe a little bit too fond of white's position here?
Mm, well, it looks really nice to me also. But what would your next moves be if you were white? If you got free moves that didn't involve, like you asked me in the other position, that didn't involve just taking your opponent's pieces.
That's a great. I always like that. Maybe g5 to try to free up the e5 square for my knight. That's always an
Mm-hmm.
idea to consider. Um, Also, rook a4, just to stop this queen b4 move, which may mean that black should play queen b4 now if you think that trading queens will lessen your losing chances, because white is clearly better. So keeping the queens on the board, white just can continue squeezing black. Perhaps black should start with queen b4. I'm not confident in the queen trade either, but what do you think, Jennifer? Is black better suited without the queens?
I would try to get the queens off because my concern is not only rook a4, but what about just rook a7? That's gonna lock your queen up on e7.
Yeah, that's
And
actually
then I guess you could play it to d6 as well, but you're really you don't have a wide choice of squares. I think I would try to trade queens with queen b4, but that doesn't look that great either, but it does look more promising.
it's one of these positions where we both just sighed and we're like, that bishop on c8 is a really sad piece. I mean,
Yeah, in order to extricate it, you need to be able to play the move e5 sometime, which will almost definitely be a sacrifice because you have so many pieces protecting that square.
right. And it's
Uh,
another reason why I've been kind of advocating for, if you gave me a free move for white, I would play g5, taking my pawn off the square that would be under attack, but also saying you're not getting e5 in ever if I can get rid of this f6 pawn for my g4 pawn, because now I control the e5 square.
Yeah, queen b4, and then maybe trying to play e5 right away because of the tactics on g4. Now the d5 is not hanging. Like right now, we could try e5, thinking that if pawn takes e5, bishop d4, but the problem is d5 hangs.
Right.
Whereas here, and just suppose you move your knight somewhere random. Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah. That's exactly. Whereas in this line, after queen b4.
okay, let's say knight e2, and then you're saying e5 is a possibility for sure, because this
Yeah, I
bishop can
could.
steal this pawn.
Right. I mean, I'm not even sure this works because you can also play f takes e5, bishop g4, pawn takes f6. But and the line continues. You know, bishop f3, pawn f3, king f7, king f7. But I don't know. I don't trust it for black. That's for sure.
No, I don't either, because your rook a7 move will be powerful. The d5 pawn is still weak and hard to keep defended. So ultimately, I agree with you, though I think from the perspective of trying to evaluate the position in your head, it's not easy for white to say, wait, can I allow e5 or not? You're always going to question yourself on whether or not that's okay. And she played king to g7, which seems to be walking out of any sort of discoveries along the diagonal. But I'm looking immediately at your move, rook to a7 for starters, and my move g5, both of which will prevent black from playing this e5 break.
That's right. And by the way, I see Judith Stare, who is in the chat as well. So shout out to her. She's also instrumental in making all this happen.
Got it. I'm reading what she's saying here. It begins.
She was organizer of the year. I think it was last year. And this year, I believe it's Jay Stallings.
That sounds right. And she's done a really fantastic job organizing events before the pandemic, of course, in person. Um, and now, well, organizing them online. She's adjusting to the situation well, and making sure that people can get the chess that they want in their lives. And we're certainly happy that that is happening.
Yeah, it's great to see that some people have really just been able, because it's very difficult for people. A lot of changes in life, family situations, kids not going to school. So I just have such tremendous respect for people who are able to transition, while I also don't judge those who struggle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you would know with having kids. I don't have any, but you have a young son, so you know differences when you can take your child out or when you have to be at home. So you have more perspective on that, I should say, than I do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult time, but for me, I think I'm a little luckier than most because 3.5 years old, he's still not part of like the public school, 8 to 3 system. So I'm not missing out on that.
Right.
But yeah, it is hard not having him in daycare more, not because I don't love the extra time, but I think being social is important for kids. So that has been a bit of a struggle. But the thing is, people are just so adaptable. They're so
Right.
adaptable, and kids are even more adaptable than anyone. But
Completely agree.
let's pick another. And she's actually in the chat, and she says she has 3 kids, and they're all starting online school in the fall. Wow. Well, mad respect.
Yeah,
Let's see.
I tell my mom that she's lucky that we're all adults now because it would have certainly been probably a nightmare for her to have 3 kids all separated by, well, I'm a year older than my brother. My sister is 16 months older than I am. That sounds like a handful and a half to deal with. So let's move on. Which game? I see one really interesting game between VB Chess and Volcano Explorer. That one caught my eye. Is that a game that we could potentially go to?
Oh, that looks like a lot of fun. Absolutely. But who's having more fun is the question. B3 was just played. That night on A4. No, C3 is adequately covered. A3 is adequately covered. And unfortunately, it looks like we might just have to head on back down the stairs with that knight on A4, which is definitely not what we want when we go to the trouble of making this attack. Unless I'm missing something like bishop A3 and queen E7 check. No, none of that really works. So that I'm a little worried because I feel like if Black wasn't successful, now White is going to get his turn, and that weakness with move B5 sticking out like a sore thumb is not going to be fun.
No, it's not. Actually, Black may just be losing a piece because knight A4 to B6, it feels like the only safe square. And after C4, the threat is not just your knight on D5, but also by C5, forking the bishop on D6 and the knight on B6. So actually, I think that very concretely, White is going to win material.
That's right. And the problem is moves like knight F4 don't really help because you still just have C5, knight D3, queen D3, and everything seems to be adequately covered. So
This
yeah, it
will
looks
be.
like
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jennifer.
looks like you caught this at a time where White is gonna reel in the winning advantage.
Yeah, and I was going to say this will looks like it's going to be the first loss for Quinn Hudson, the upset specialist of the day. Quinn did beat Carissa Yip in the opening round and then drew with Logan Wu. That was a lesser of an upset to draw instead of a win, a 200-point rating gap rather than a 400-point rating gap. But Quinn has had an excellent day and deserves kudos for that.
All right. What else do we have going on here? Should we check in on our top seed here in the girls tournament? The Happy Farmer, the Jolly Rancher, the International Master Annie Wang playing now against Chess Parakeet.
Okay, tuning in here, we see in knight on F4, which looks good for Black, but the queen is a little awkward on H6, I must say.
Mm-hmm.
So that one looks worse than the queen F3, bishop E4 configuration, and the rook on B1 certainly is happy. But the back rank is not so thrilled. So Jennifer, I see some good things for White, some good things for Black. Whose pluses outweigh the others?
That's a tough question. This is a real challenge for Annie. I believe she had 2 relatively easier games in the first 2 rounds, but now this is quite interesting. We can't take on B7. It is White's move, but if we take on B7, just the immediate F5,
Nice.
we'll win the day. And I don't think there's any kind of tactics or tricks there. You're just going to lose. So what should White do if we can't do that? I mean, we always have to consider the move D5, right? Because gaining that strong pawn could be good for us, or it could end up being a liability. I mean, what do you think?
D5 is definitely a move that is coming to mind. And I will note that the rook takes D4 is not really a threat because let's say I play A3 and you try rook takes D4. I think I have bishop takes H7 check. So just like the bishop could have been pinned on E4 in Black's favor, here it removes itself in White's favor with this rook staring down at the Black rook on E. So you'd have to play King F8 and the kings walk to the center. That's not so fun. So I just wanted to point out the d4 pawn may not be under attack just yet. However, even if it's not under attack, I still like the idea of your d5 move because after pawn takes d5, pawn takes d5. I think this pawn on d5 is healthy for the time being, and so I can put my rook to d1 next and try to protect it and maybe try to push it eventually. So I'm buying d5. Maybe not this move, but in the next couple moves, I could see that happening.
Yeah, and this one's just going to be a long battle, I think. So we'll keep our eye on this. Unlike the top seeds we checked out in the Denker, I felt like most of the top seeds in the Denker, we really like their positions. We really like Nikola Cheka's position. Let's check in on that. It looks like the nature of his advantage has changed a lot, Robert, in that before his opponent was all tied up, but he wasn't up any material. He has converted that, and he's up a pawn, and he's probably totally winning. But I have to tell you, I still thought it would be even worse. I thought White would have to resign, like lose all their pieces. So I'm not sure it really matters because with the king being also very strong for Nikola, it's probably just totally winning anyway. But just incidentally, I thought it would be even better than this.
Yeah, it's funny. It's an extra pawn, so you're happy about the material advantage rather than just a positional one or having a bind. But there are certain end games that are quite tricky. And one thing that I'll say, which again, for most people in the audience, are like, what are you talking about, Robert? If black is left with two knights and only two knights, and white is left with nothing except the king, so king and two knights versus a king, that end game is theoretically drawn, right? So as I know that, and Jennifer, you know that, and these players both certainly know that, that's what I would keep in the back of my mind if I were Christopher. Like, is there a way I can try to trade off these kingside pawns? And then maybe if I even have to sacrifice my knights for the remaining pawns, that's a way to make it a draw. So it's a really far off concept. It's just one that I would store in the back of my mind, put that in my back pocket and say, all right, let me see how I can start accomplishing this and making black's life as difficult as possible.
Well, you know what, Robert? When things aren't looking up, you always got to have hope. So that certainly is something to hold on to for Christopher here, thinking about different ways in which if his opponent errs, he can win. So I think this is going to be a longer struggle than I expected. I thought we were going to see an absolute crush. Let's take a look at Robert's game. Actually, I think we actually analyzed this exact line. And now Robert's trying to figure out how to increase the pressure. But I love this kind of stuff. It's really precise and it's fun to watch. And because we know that Robert is a great tactical player, it's fun to see how he thinks he can increase his advantage here. We looked at this before, I believe. The variation Queen E8, Queen G4, Queen F8 did take place. Then Queen F4, hitting the pawn on F7 and really forcing the king back to G8. So what now?
I liked your idea with rook on g3 if it forces g6, and because in the earlier line the rook on c8 could have gone to g8, that not being possible, I like just retreating the rook to d3, sliding it over to g3, and getting that knight into f6.
Wow. Yeah, it is amazing because before your queen was in e7 and your king on h8. So you had this very precise plan to stick your rook on g8 to defend everything. And you're just to move short now because rook d3, king h8, rook g3, you can't get the rook to g8. It's brilliant. I love it. I mean, is there anything else? Probably. There's probably some other good moves here too. It's very paradoxical, Robert, though. It's not an easy move to find. I mean, even though we did find it, it's not like we're using engines, but I still feel like sometimes the commentator, the perspective is a little bit different because we're just popping into the position and, you know, we don't have all that context. Whereas when you move your rook to d7, you're usually pretty excited about that, right? You've got your rook on the 7th rank. And I'm not sure. What do you think? Do you think he's going to play that move?
I think retreating moves are always the hardest to find. And you're completely right that we just tune back in. And I'm thinking, well, what were we talking about earlier? Oh, Jennifer made this really good point of if I can attack the g7 pawn and force g6, my knight gets into f6. And now that...
And he's sacrificed a piece, guys. So definitely not our move, but maybe this is his idea, Robert.
Well,
maybe
you had made mention of this being a possibility, but you said after g f6, e takes f6, king h8, that we kind of thought that black was getting away with this. And it's not the end of the game, of course. The rook on d7 is strong and the potential for the attack. But what is his idea after g takes f6 here?
Maybe it's rook d3 then.
Oh my gosh.
What about g takes f6, rook d3? Oh, but then there's f5. There's f5, and I think f5 is a good move, Robert, because pawn takes f5, rook d3, f5, rook g3 check, king h8, queen g5. Suddenly you have moves like f6 to prevent disaster.
You have f6, or you even have h6 miraculously at queen
Yeah.
f6 check, king h7, and there no more checks.
That doesn't look good. So pawn f6, rook d3, d3 we didn't like. What about, and queen takes f6, there's just queen g7, right? I mean, there's a draw there. Pawn takes f6, queen f6, queen g7, rook d8 check will lead to a forced draw, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine that he wanted that, though. So he must think that rook d3 is winning or pawn takes f6 thing is winning, because he wouldn't play knight f6 check to make a draw. No way. Wow, that would not be the intent.
What a crazy position. And knight f6 check, this is what happens, honestly, is when you're frustrated that your opponent's position hasn't broken and you force it. You go knight f6 check, saying, I'm going to win this game. And these kind of moves often backfire. And I'm not trying to be critical of either player. I think that from the perspective of trying to defend this position with black, that Samrug has really done a great job of being resourceful and sort of bending but not breaking the position. And knight f6 check is one of those moves where you're like, I feel like I need to do it. It's in the spirit of the position. And you don't even have to take it, honestly. You can play king to h8 if you're too afraid. But I do think that taking it should leave black with very good chances to hold the game.
Pawn f6, queen f6, queen g7. Seems like I'm going to be forced to acquiesce to a draw. My original idea of pawn f6 doesn't look very good at all after king h8. I don't even know how I make a threat there.
Well, let me ask you the question that you like to ask, we both like to ask, is what's black's next move after pawn f6, king h8? If I gave black a free move, what would black do?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, I could try to kick your rook out with bishop c6, but I might just be kicking you to a better square, huh? Another thought is if I play rook to d8.
And you give up the c7 pawn and then try to
yeah, maybe that's not very smart. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. So this is definitely not easy for black, but I'm also just like wondering, like, what's white's threat? So you want to just take...
I don't have a threat. I'm being honest with you. I have no threat for white. I was just wondering, how bad is it even if I go down the piece for one pawn here, like how is black going to take advantage of it?
Yeah, maybe we need to like first play. It's not easy. It's not easy to figure out how to unravel here without causing disaster. Maybe we play something like bishop to d5, but you do have c4.
I think it's just a really tough to evaluate position. I think black has to be better in those kind of positions, but because you feel a little tied down, you may stress out and collapse under some pressure here. And with the open G file, especially, there are plenty of threats. So I think that those kind of draw lines that you were mentioning with the queen f6 and rook d8 and just back and forth, that may just happen. And g takes f6 is finally played.
I think so, because after queen f6, you don't have another option. I mean, what else can you do besides queen g7? Because if you don't do that, then this rook d3 idea is just so powerful. Okay, let's check one idea. Suppose queen f6 and black suddenly decides they want to win. And they play bishop to a6, thinking that they're stopping rook d3. Well, sadly, there are two routes to the g file. Rook d4 is the other one. But still, let's keep looking. And now suppose you just try to stop it with the brute force move h5. I mean, that just looks so terrible, because then you have queen g5 check.
Wait, but then you have king h7. Actually, it's kind of brilliant.
Oh, because of queen h6 check.
Yeah, counter check.
Yeah, nice counter check. Okay, well, maybe I don't do it that way then after h5. I got to play something better. It's just h5 looks like not good. Maybe I have to just go like a circuitous route here to g3. Like, I don't know what to do actually.
Maybe there's queen g5 and the king h7, this really funny move rook f4, because I'm stopping queen h6 from being a check and I'm putting pressure on f7.
Right, and then you're also maybe ready to play rook f6 yourself, which will renew the threat of queen h5.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting lines. Interesting lines. So, it seems really greedy though. My gut is that after if Robert does indeed play queen f6, which I think he must have missed something with because it's obviously he's a great tactician. So I have no doubt that he saw queen f6, queen g7 draws. Like, I think what it is maybe he missed something after rook d3. Oh, but he did play rook d3. He played rook d3 in the game.
He has indeed played rook d3, and we were looking at f5 before. I wonder, Jennifer, you actually have encouraged me now. You're like, okay, black can always say, in all these lines, it looks like white has a draw here. So is there a move that's not f5? Because f5, queen
We have queen
g5
g5.
check.
Right. We have queen g5. We were looking at rook g3 instinctively thinking white was trying to play for a win, but that actually loses. So queen g5, luckily, we still have that draw because queen g7, rook d8 check.
Yeah, and just the best that black can do is just allow this repetition of queen d8 to f6 and queen g7 to queen g8. So there's nothing more to speak of there. That would be a draw. So we know that f5 allows a draw immediately. Is there another move that black can play here? Maybe it's queen to c5, hoping for some kind of counter threats. And I know that you're giving up f6 and rook g3 is coming, but is there a way for black to play for more? Or do you think that black should just say, all right, I had a worse position before. Now I'm getting out of this. Let me just secure the half point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe they need to do that. Yeah. And that's going to be, yeah, I think they're going to secure the half point here.
Probably the smartest decision, honestly.
Yeah, I think so. But what an interesting game that we popped in on. And I'm sure Robert thought he was winning here somehow. I don't think he would have played it otherwise, which makes me wonder if he missed. Because, he wasn't down material in the initial position and he was dominating all the black's pieces. So, he would have just played like king to b1 or something if he knew that he had to take a forced draw. I think he must have missed rook g3 check, king h8, queen g5, and like the strength of either h6 or f6. I'm not sure, but maybe something like that.
Yeah, h6 is a very weird move to play when it looks like white is barreling down the open G file, but you just need space for your king as you're up a full piece. And if you're not checkmating the black king, you're just down the material. So I think you're right, Jennifer. It wasn't that he missed that you could take on f6. Obviously not. It was like 4 or 5 moves down the line. He underestimated black's resources here, and now he's regretting it because he'll probably play queen g5 and make a draw. And if that's the case, he missed. No, he didn't miss a win. There was no clear win that he missed. Nothing like that. He just missed an opportunity to make his opponent's life more difficult. And as chess players, it's actually one of the most frustrating things. It's not the result itself. It's about how easy you made your life's opponent when you could have made them struggle.
And queen g5 check was played, and we are going to see queen g7, rook d8. What a battle, though, and what a fun player to watch, Robert. And kudos to his opponent as well for saving the draw. As I don't see the game going any other way now. That's for sure.
Definitely. And we have another game that we've been interested in that has a completely different dynamic, and it is Martha's game, because this position has been wide open, potential attacks. Let's go on over to a wise pawn, because that position is completely locked up now, where it's an end game with 2 rooks, a bishop, and 8 pawns. All 8 pawns are on the board here. I personally like white's position, and I do think you need to act quickly. And one of the ideas, Jennifer, that I'm looking at when I first tune in this position is taking on f5, and after g takes f5, playing g4, because I would love to advance my king into the square e4. I don't know what both sides are doing on the c file. That one looks really closed over here. But if I can start making progress with my king, I think that white is going to be happy about that.
Yeah. I mean, this looked really good for a while, Robert. And yeah, just that bad bishop on d6. I mean, some people, including Yasser Saruman, like to say bad bishops defend good pawns, but I don't know. I still don't think this is a bishop we're happy about. This is not a happy bishop.
It certainly is not. And you see this bishop on d2. A3 was played instead, focusing on the queen side. But the bishop on d2 could move out on the diagonal, whereas the bishop on d6 is sort of stuck here. And also, this bishop blockades white's pass pawn, whereas the white king is blockading black's pass pawn. So just a different dynamic there. And I guess white is trying to play b4. I don't know if that actually creates any threat exactly, but it is something that, of course, white is trying to expand. So,
So good opportunity for Martha to try to get to 3-0. Who else is still looking for that sweep in the day? And by the way, it was a draw. I think I should have pointed out, though, that if Robert had tried still to stubbornly win with queen e7 threatening rook g3, f4 could potentially have been a problem. If you want to go back,
yes,
like
f4.
I think that could have, now, like if you don't get anything out of this on the g file, suddenly you're in danger of losing.
For sure. So you'd have to act quickly. And actually, there's also queen takes e5 possibilities because the king, it's pushed to h8, but that's not a checkmate. And on the other hand, black is sort of flipping the script here with a checkmate on e1 threat. So it's just you play too hard for a win, you're really playing for a loss.
Yep, and Robert knew that it was time to call it quits, and that was a well-played draw, although I'm sure Robert, after analyzing it, or even after getting the draw, realized that he would have loved to have a little more there.
Definitely. And, well, we have so many other games. I mean, I'm going to bring us back to the Alice Lee game because it still looks really tough for her. And I think she's doing the right thing, though, because so g5 ended up happening just a couple moves ago where white went g5 to take over the e5 square, but somehow I feel like black will have a chance to play g5 herself and try to open up this position. So maybe there's some counter strikes available for Alice.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the game myself. I guess I'll just look at it on your board, though. Let's see.
Power of a Point. We really like that username. Playing Pillsbury Bind 101.
It still just looks such a regrettable position for black, but I agree. I like this idea. You got to get any type of active counterplay you can get. So g5 is certainly a good idea. By the way, Volcano Explorer, that game where c4 was winning a piece, he did end up winning his game. So nice win there.
Okay, I'm just pulling that position back up. We tuned in at b3, and exactly what we predicted, c4. And then instead of allowing c5, gave up the knight on d5, and that was just a losing battle regardless, as white is up a piece and was delivering just a winning position. So many options here to look at still. We also have Jennifer Yu's game. We can pick our own adventure. So I'm happy to go wherever you feel is best.
Yeah, let's check in on our U.S. Women's Champion, Jennifer Yu.
Let's do it.
She wasn't nicked for a draw in this tournament, so she's certainly trying to win this game to keep her chances alive. One of the nice things about being one of the higher rated players is that you know that if somebody has more points than you, you have a good chance of playing them in the final rounds. So you can usually control your own destiny, even if you're nicked for half a point.
It's true, right? If you're the player who's a half point back and there's an odd number in the score group above you, let's say there's only one person, you will be the person that floats up to take them on. And right now, her last move as black was g5. She understands that, well, I have two bishops. My king is perfectly safe. We often are taught, and we teach our students that pushing pawns in front of your king can make your king vulnerable. But here g5 was played because, well, the black king is in no danger whatsoever. And I actually think that black can kind of start an attack here as king g7. If you ever take on g5 with the opening of the h-file, that suits black and not white. So I do like Jennifer's position at the moment.
Yeah, and I do have that Alice Lee game up now between Pillsbury Bind and Power of a Point, and God, it looks bad for black still. So I
Yeah.
mean, this would be an upset, right? Because Alice Lee's only 10 years old, but she's already 2,200.
And for Amanda, that would be her second big victory in a row because she just defeated Yili Wen, who is almost 300 points higher rated than she is.
Oh, that would be incredible. Let's see if she can do it. What to play here? So Rook F8 was just played, and now what should White do? We've got so many things tied down here, right? The queen is stuck on D6, but how do we increase or maintain our pressure?
This bishop on C8 is so bad. It's stuck there, can't move. The C6, the B5 pawns, the E6. Honestly, Black's best move is taking this pawn E6 and throwing it into the ocean. Just like get,
Yeah.
get rid of this pawn and jump the bishop over it, and then you have some counterplay. But the pawn is just restricting the bishop, and this has been a really dominant positional performance by White. And that's why I think you have to play G5. You can't just sit on this position forever, as you're not doing anything from Black's point of view. So I think you need to open things up with G5, especially because Amanda only has 13 minutes and it's counting down here. If things get more complicated, that's the best way to try to salvage this game.
Yeah, but G5 is also so weakening at the same time. Maybe G5, Rook A8, threatening Rook takes C8.
Yeah. You know, Jennifer, these positions, if I'm White, I'm trying to just jump my king from G1 over to A2. Like, I would feel so much better, I feel like, if my king were on that side of the board.
That would be, oh my gosh, that would be quite a king walk.
Yeah, we can't do it because we can't walk into the F file because let's say after king to F2, his bishop takes E5, and after D takes D5, queen takes D5. At the very least, gives Black some hope because the F4 pawn is pinned. It's still good for White. Everything will be good for White because of how bad this bishop on C8 is and how weak the pawn C7 is. But I'm just going to show that there are some tactics, and White has to be a little bit careful and catch dilly dally all over the place. I really don't know this position.
Well, we'll continue to keep our eye on it to see if she can pull off the upset 2 rounds in a row. Well, we'll be looking. Meanwhile, what else is going on in the women's section, the girls section? There is Annie Wang's game still going on. We mentioned that it was going to be a tough battle because it's all about her bishop on F3 and this beautiful knight on F4. And frankly, the knight on F4 looks better, but it's not just the minor piece battle. There are other things going on in Annie's position that, mitigate the weaker minor piece. And I think the B file is the main example of that.
It is indeed. And the pawn on B7 already under attack. Black can try to play B6, but then the C6 pawn is one that can be captured. So is White really threatening queen takes B7? That's one of the big questions here. I would say the answer is yes. So if that's the case, I need to come up with something that is helpful for Black. And maybe queen A5, just putting pressure on this rook on E1. I'm creating a threat. I did like my queen on G5, but from A5, I apply some pressure on A2. I am hitting this rook on E1 as mentioned, so that looks like a reasonable move.
I'm taking a quick peek at your chat, and Checkmate is 64 says these usernames are fire. Yeah, I mean, these kids are just so amazing at coming up with usernames. They're so creative. The Happy Farmer, I mentioned it 4 times today, but since we do have more and more people joining the stream, I think we're maybe close to our peak, Robert. The Happy Farmer, Annie Wang, is called that because she wanted to be the Jolly Rancher. The name was already taken, so she subbed Jolly with Happy and Rancher with Farmer, and here she is, the top seed in the National Girls Tournament of Champions. But I don't know. Honestly, in this game, I think I would take Black if you forced me to pick a side.
Okay, wow. It's taking time into account. I think you'll end up picking White, but I sort of have the same gut feeling as you that you feel like the tactical possibilities will favor Black. So I would also, I like the fact that the knight can hop from F4 to E6 to D4 at some point, and that will be annoying for White to deal with.
And by the way, speaking of usernames, like a happy pawn is Jennifer Yu, who's the U.S. Women's Champion, and a wise pawn is Martha Samadashvili, who's the reigning National Girls Tournament of Champions. So, what should a young girl watching this stream who wants to be a great champion like them cause their account? What other adjective can we use for a pawn?
They're wise. They're happy. They are important. Pawns are often forgotten about too regularly. So I would say that.
Soulful pawn.
Ooh, a soulful pawn.
A jolly pawn. I like that because that's a bit of like a merge of Annie Wang's handle and Jennifer's. Yeah, there's a lot of nice, possibly clever pawn, sacrificial pawn, brave pawn. We're getting a lot of nice suggestions in the chat.
Dead pawn. I like that.
Yeah, keep it up, guys. And maybe you'll come up with a name almost as good as one of the names in this tournament.
What if we got to get someone with like an Obi-Wan Kenobi. You got to get some Star Wars references in there and just a little play on words. I don't know, something like that.
Ooh, what just happened though? Okay, so Queen A5 attacking the rook on E1. Just played by Chess Parakeet. Now, what if I play Queen E3 with the double attack of hitting your knight and also Queen E8 checkmating? Ooh. So Queen E3 here. I'm assuming you're forced to play Knight G6 or Knight E6, but that the whole thing was your knight was so cool on F4, and then I'm going to be able to play D5 with tempo, and suddenly I wonder if it's turning around.
Although this Queen E5...
You're playing the better move of Knight G6. Knight E6 would be a worse option. Yeah.
Yeah, Knight E6 sort of walks into D5. Mm-hmm. Not the end of the world, but just gives White a free tempo. But Knight G6, I was just pointing out that the pawn on A2 is under attack as well. So it's not like there are no threats for Black to take advantage of. By the way, Avocado, Iris, and Flying Monkey, they drew their game. 2 other good usernames.
Yeah, so Knight G6 is cool because it prevents Queen E8 check. Because you have rook takes E8, rook takes E8, knight F8. I'm tempted to play something like H4 there. And sure. I mean, this game, Black still has counterplay, but I'm just very happy that I took your knight from my favorite square, F4, F5, and put it to Robert's least favorite square, which is G6 or G3. From Annie's point of view, that would make me happy or jolly, if you will.
Well, I mean, one problem, though, for White that continues to be here is that the queen is overloaded protecting this rook on E1. So if I get a free move for Black, there's going to be some kind of rook takes D4 moves. If you take me back on D4, you lose your rook on E1. So there actually are plenty of threats, and maybe this move D5, Jennifer, is necessary regardless, and it's just a good move. A2 pawn, it's important. I don't want to dismiss it, but if you ever take on D5 and allow my bishop on D5, threatening the king side, the attack is more important than just this A2 pawn.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a good bishop, because earlier we were saying knight on F4 better than bishop F3, but hey, if that lands on D5, the situation will most certainly flip.
It will, and well, we'll see what happens, but only after a short break. We'll be back soon with more coverage of the 2020 Denker and Haring Tournament of State Champions. we're not gone for long at all. In fact, it was such a short break that Annie hasn't even made a move after queen to a5. So the action continues to unfold in several of these other games, but players wisely using the time they have remaining to try to figure out the complications. So, Jennifer, we've been at Annie's game for a while. Why don't we head back over to the game with Martha because she tries to keep pace atop the leaderboard in the herring tournament. And look at this. I mean, this is a game of checkers.
Yeah, but it's a game of checkers that white is potentially winning. I mean, I don't know. I'm very concerned for black's position here with this permanently dead bishop on d6.
Well, didn't
We
you tell
have to
me
open a line. We can't have it if it's completely locked up. Like just for the argument's sake, if we play like white plays like g4 here and puts their pawn on h5, yeah, we could easily see a position where there's literally no pawn breaks. So it's all about keeping those pawn breaks alive, and that's what gives Martha winning chances.
Okay, so let's imagine starting with g takes f4 for that pawn break.
Mm-hmm.
And what will the response be? Do I take with, I think if I take with the g pawn, white will try to go rook g1. But what if we just trade rooks on g7 next? And how does white break through here?
Yeah, maybe we should go the other way for like the b4 pawn break instead.
Okay, so if we start with b4, I'm worried about 8 takes and
then rook a3 check, right?
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, no, it's definitely not easy. Not easy. Never easy.
So I start with h4. I'm trying to figure out which of these many different pawn breaks I should try because I can play h4 temporarily giving up the g3 pawn, but then I h4, f takes g3, take with check, and then put my rook on g2, and I win back this pawn while putting pressure on this g5 pawn. So I don't think black can go pawn grabbing just yet. And so h4 does remain a possibility here. It's just, maybe I'll play h4. That way I don't have to rush my decision. Try to open up more lines for the pieces.
Yeah. Or if if GF, we were trying rook g2. Is there anything else we can do there? Maybe we need to like put our bishop on e1 somehow. I'm just trying to like figure out some way to get my bishop more active. I don't know. This is definitely going to be a tough fight, though. Martha with a big positional advantage, but with so little material left on the board, the result is very much in doubt.
It is indeed, and I'm trying to figure it out too because h4 trying to open up more space, it can backfire. Right? If you open up too many lines and black's rooks get there first, that could be a problem. And the bishop on d6 is looking quite bad. And what I would like to see, if I'm looking at this position from Martha's perspective, is somehow this bishop wrapping around into the black position. So if I can trade rooks and trade g pawns and get a bishop e1 to h4, as you were just asking about, maybe I can get my bishop all the way to d8. That's a really long story. It will not happen. But that's essentially the one thing that I'm seeing that would make it as clear cut as possible. I just don't see how you make that work. So it's I play h4 here.
Yeah, and we'll keep our eye on that. Let's see what other games are still going on. Well, the top seeds in the Denker are still battling. Nico Cheka is in a more simplified night end game now, and the move g4 was just played by his opponent, and now, of course, the variations have to be calculated quite well. Takes on b4, king g4, knight a4. Is that a winning endgame for black?
Wow. Okay. So let's try to visualize this because once you make the move over the board, you can't take it back. So Nico is, unless he's been spending a bit of time at this point already, he'll spend a lot more time trying to figure out this because you have to essentially finger point here, 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 here. Does it work? Let's see. So if you take on g4, you drag the king to g4, you take this pawn on a4, and you lose the pawn on g5. So essentially, I know there's a lot to visualize. We'll put the position on the board in a second. The white king takes over to the g5 square. Black is up an a pawn, and the knight on d8 is probably misplaced. And the real question is, can white quickly run the king back to c1 and try to get over to the a1 square and stop the pawn. So let's put this on the board. Takes, knight a4, king g5, knight c5, I guess. Take away the b7 square, or knight. Where's this knight go to? I think c5, right?
Yeah, knight c5, trying to keep you away from b7.
King f4. My king's in time.
Your king's in time.
a5, king e3, a4, king d2, a3, king c1, and my king gets back to the corner.
Yeah, and your king's in time also if I trade knights first.
Right.
All right, but there's other options instead of takes on g4 right away. Yeah, you can also try take on a4 first, or playing like king e5 or f4. So we've got other options besides takes on g4, the ultra simplifying one.
Yeah.
I mean, f4 is definitely one that comes to mind, right?
The one worry I have after f4 is after knight f7, you're going to immediately win this g5 pawn, which probably means that f4 is falling next. And unless I can keep your pieces away from the a file, then that would allow white to steal the pawns and then try to jump over to the queen side. And black, unfortunately, with that g4 pawn still existing, you can't put all your attention to the a pawn because you'll need to stop the g pawn as well.
So instead, maybe just king e5 or knight a4. I mean, better yet, knight a4, and then after f5, after g takes f, then king e5. And I've similar lines to before, and he did take on a4, and so now takes on f5, king e5, king g4. What do we think of that position?
Okay, so he took on a4, g takes f5, and I wonder if. Okay, so king e5, king g4, and I'm getting this g pawn, which is frustrating.
I mean, yeah, I guess I could play king f6.
And I get.
You do get the pawn, but I mean, at what cost? Because now I'm going to gain a couple of tempos to start running with my a pawn,
Right?
Which tends to be the most valuable pawn in these knight games.
Yeah,
I don't know. This is just a pure calculation game, isn't it?
And as I said, you can't take the moves back. So if you're not calculating accurately, you make a decision that immediately results in a draw. You kind of hold your head. Oh, I had these chances here, didn't make the most of them. So we have g takes f5 played, and now Nico will need to think, because not only is king e5 a move, Jennifer, knight c5 is also an option here, because your knight can drop back to d7 if needed to stop this f pawn. And now I have the splits. I have an a pawn and a g pawn. So it's going to divert the attention of the king to one pawn, likely the knight to the other, and maybe you don't have time to corral both.
Yeah, this is going to come down to the wire, this game. Meanwhile, another game in progress on the top boards of Denker is Praveen's game against Mate Schmate. That's another great name. So many good ones.
Yeah, Mate Schmate is Joshua Grabinski.
Right. Joshua Grabinski from Oregon. He's got 2 minutes on the clock, but his position isn't bad. I mean, that knight on e5 and that bishop on f6 give a really nice impression. Well-placed pieces. The pawn potentially could come to g4 to strengthen the grip on the position, and the bishop on a4 is basically trapped, so you got to watch out for b5.
And honestly,
I mean, of course, you could sacrifice that as white and get 3 pawns, but I don't know. It's a constant worry.
It is, and it stems from the decision after move 13, bishop b5, c6, dropping the bishop back to a4. Thought the bishop should go back to e2. Bishop a4 also made sense to go to b3, but the bishop never went to b3 because instead white put a pawn on b3 to kick the knight out, but that leaves your bishop gasping for air on the queen side over here, and b5, as you said, becomes a threat. There may be a sacrifice that you have to be on the lookout for, but this b5 move will trap the bishop if it's allowed. So white has a tough choice here. Jennifer, what moves come to mind? I think f4 is one of them, and I think white needs to act quickly.
Yeah, white does need to act quickly and also try to play on mate's clock. 2 minutes left for him, and that's not like a 2 minutes in some of the time scrambles we've seen. This is a highly complex position with almost all the pieces still on the board, so it's way less than if you're in like some kind of rook end game with 2 minutes. So yeah, I like f4. Just keep it complicated.
Yeah.
For Praveen.
And what a position this is, because it's really not looking comfortable for white at this point. You don't have any threats right now. You're hoping that you can start creating them and do so quickly. Otherwise, your position is on the verge of falling apart. And actually, after f4, maybe just knight to g4, because I'm attacking this rook on d4. I'm attacking this bishop on e3. I don't like this one bit from Praveen's perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that. Maybe he has to play something more chill, like h3. But there's knight f3. I just don't know what to do. And he played rook to b4. Looking to just like stay aggressive, prevent the forks. But there is moves like knight f3 here, and the bishop is attacking the c3 pawn. But instead, black pretty quickly played bishop to e7. He's very aware that he's down on the clock and
Queen
doesn't
a6,
want to get
Jennifer?
further down. Queen a6 right now.
The pawn on b7's pinned. I'm attacking a7.
Yeah.
That looks pretty dangerous.
And if I take on b4, you probably have a mate, but
I didn't see a mate. I just thought that I would have an exchange down, but have the bishop here and this king on c7.
Okay.
Not very happy.
Not a happy pawn, not a wise pawn. Yeah, okay. So bishop e7, you're saying queen a6 right now.
I think that white needs to act quickly, and it's in the spirit of the position. Otherwise, black is just going to have a much better position.
What about not taking on b4? Do we have other moves, like for instance c5 interfering with the attack on the a7 square?
Yeah, you know, if queen a6, c5, you also are opening up my bishop to your rook on e8. So at the very least, I can just scoop off that rook there and say, well, I got rid of my worst piece.
I have an idea. What about d4?
Okay, so d4. What if I just take it?
I was thinking I could then play c5, but
knight's
hanging with jack. Sorry, yeah. Okay, so I don't know what to do here. Let's see. Maybe that line with the king on c7 wasn't that terrible. Bishop b4. Like we should look at that again. Like, how bad is that?
It doesn't look good, but I think he may have to go for it at this point. And he has a minute and 25 seconds and counting down now. So either you play c5 and give up the exchange on e8, and that's what was just played.
He did play c5. He played c5.
After bishop takes e8, you can't even take on b4 because the pawn is needed on c5 to stop queen takes a7. So it does look like after this rook takes e8, you just play down an exchange here, and white can't complain too much about that.
Yeah, no, that was a nice play. I actually really liked the move rook b4 then in time pressure with this idea of queen a6. Turned out fantastically. Black maybe had a defense, but he did not have the time to find the defense. So in other words, he didn't have a defense.
What a really smart move to play in your opponent's time trouble. And I just saw the question again. I guess you weren't here. Why not bishop takes b4? Oh, queen a7 check, king c7, and then just pawn takes b4. And even though black has an extra rook, it's for a bishop and a pawn, and this king's on c7 out in the open. Dark square control, maybe b5 in the future for white. The position is being blasted open, and it's not going to be fun for that black king. So that's why instead decides to play c5, giving up this rook on e8. And I think from a practical point of view, it makes sense. From a time point of view, it's just going to be a struggle.
And by the way, Jennifer Yu has just won her game, and she did it with a nice tactic at the end. So let's draw our attention to that.
Ooh. Okay. So the H file did open up, which is bad news when a rook can come to h8 and a white rook can come to h1. So we saw the trade. Rook h8 played. Oh my gosh, Jennifer, you got to love that finish.
That's nice. Somebody's been doing her tactics. Rook h2 check, king h2, queen f2, and rook h8 mating is coming. But let's just show a mate. It actually, queen f2, there was an immediate resignation. King h1, obviously, it's like mate in one, right? Well, right. Mate in two. But what about king h3?
Well, it's going to be mate in one because queen takes g3 is
It's just mate, yeah.
doing it. You're tempted to continue with rook h8, and then you realize, wait. My bishop's doing good work on d6 and hitting the g3 square. So it's going to be checkmate regardless. Rook h2 check, a phenomenal shot here, distracting the king away from the pawn.
And Jennifer Yu ending the day on a happy note as she has 2.5 out of 3. Still definitely in contention, but she might find herself in some situations where she has to play the leader and has to play for a win. So we know that Jennifer Yu is used to high pressure situations, though. So we'll certainly look forward to seeing that.
We will. And I'm going to bring our attention back to Martha's game. That's a wise pawn because the position has changed a ton here. And it's Black's move where the last one was rook to h1, going after this pawn on h4. So the position was indeed cracked open. And h4 is hanging. If that falls, and f4 is under attack. But Black can start playing on the queen side with pawn to a4, Jennifer. I feel like there's some chances for Black to hold, even though I still prefer White's position.
Yeah, absolutely. Just the more trades that come in the position, the more likely Black will be able to hold. I'll ask you the question I had about other ones and this one. Like, assuming equal playing strength, would you take White or would you take Black and draw odds?
I like the extra time for White, and I like the fact that Black's pawns are a bit split. I think I'll once again go with White and needing a win. What about you?
God, I think this time I'll take the draw odds because I'm worried about the number of pawns that are going to be left when we get to play something like a4. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. The longer Black thinks, it's tough when you start including the clock into the conversation as well. So yeah, maybe I should have said assuming equal clocks as well. Rook f8 just played, by the way.
Yeah, she's trying to protect her f4 pawn preemptively and hope that she can just sit on the position. But I'm not quite sure that you'll be able to accomplish that. And rook takes h4 should be played pretty immediately. And I just don't know actually how White makes progress. I like the fact that Black's pawns are split, but maybe there's no way to press forward here. And in which case, your point about Black, having to draw, I think that actually holds here. Maybe I'm starting to change my tune and would prefer to have Black in the draw.
And another player that we thought was going to win his game, and now I'm not so sure, is Nicholas Cheka, Grandmaster, playing against Christopher Shen. But look what's happened in the last few moves since we've seen this.
Okay, so what did happen? So we saw this g4 move, knight takes a4, gf5, knight c5, f6, and knight e6 was played, offering the exchange of knights. f7 says, you can't actually take my knight because I got a queen. And the only move was knight f8 and knight b7, stopping the pawn in its tracks. And unfortunately for Black, you can't chase this knight away. The knight can just keep on jumping around. And if the knight is sacrificed for this a6 pawn, then White will just go king g4 and win this pawn on g5. Yeah, it's honestly looking to my eyes like it probably should be a draw with best play.
Yeah, it does to me as well. So very well done defense-wise by Christopher Shen because he got himself in a lot of trouble, but it looks like he might just be getting himself out of it. Meanwhile, the game with the most pieces left in the board is still Praveen's game, and his opponent has only 20 seconds left on the clock. As now we've got a situation where he's played knight f3. Okay. Playing knight f3, but isn't there bishop c5 here?
There certainly is. Bishop takes c5. Jennifer's point is a7 is threatened with checkmate. And if bishop c5, you go rook takes e8. Rook takes e8, just rook takes c5. And now White is up in exchange. And b6 would be winning for Black with the fork. Oh, wait, but queen b5? There's queen e1 check. So hold up. This actually is not what I thought was going to happen.
Oh, there's queen. Yeah, you're right. So queen b5 here. You do have the queen e1 check. Huh.
What a crazy position.
So maybe bishop c5 is not good then. Yeah. Or instead, Praveen, by the way, did not play bishop c5. He played rook to d1. Now d4 immediately played by his opponent with just 30 seconds left on the clock.
And D4 is one of those moves where you realize the position's going south for you. You see that your time is ticking. You play D4 and hope it works out. But unfortunately, Praveen, strong player, more time, up material. This should not work out for Black.
No, and this would mean that Pravi might be the one of the only players to soar to 3-0, Robert, because it looks like Nico Cheka and who was the other player who draw that we thought we were going to win?
Robert drew
Robert.
from a good position
Yeah,
earlier.
yeah. Or a much better position where he thought he was transitioning to a winning game, and unfortunately, he was just transitioning to a draw. It happens. It happens a lot, right? Because it's so hard to miss one defensive resource, or so easy rather to miss one. So Praveen, if he wins this game, will be on 3-0, but who else will join him?
Well, we have the matchup between Brave Horse and Speed of Light. That is Andrew. The matchup of Andrew Zhang is Brave Horse 2300 US chess rating, and Andrew Hong 2533 International Master US chess rating. And what's going on here? It looks to my eyes to be has to be good for Black because Black has a queen and one pawn for the two rooks. But what's most important is king safety and the quality of the pawns. And I'm looking at this d5 pawn. I'm looking at it to go to d4, then to d3, and so on. And I feel like White's pawns are slower.
Yeah, it does look very menacing. The problem is the rook coordination's bad. When you have two rooks, they need to coordinate, and like the coordination here couldn't be worse. They're just like not communicating anymore. I think they lost each other's phone numbers.
And there's need to line up on a pawn or on some certain square, but they can't even get in the same file or the same rank. So you're right, they are out of touch, and that's going to be, I think, White's downfall.
And so that will be one of the players very likely, if he does win this game, to top the score table going into tomorrow. Andrew Hong would be up there. We're expecting Praveen to be there too. We know Carissa Gipp lost in the first round, so she won't be part of the leader circle.
No, but she wouldn't mind if players start drawing each other so she can start coming back, right?
Yeah, so it gives her a shot, indeed.
So also the Praveen game, what just happened here? Things are changing.
What? Okay. Praveen's game.
No, maybe they're not changing. I saw material being equal.
But he's threatening rook a6. Devastating threat.
Yeah. Nothing you can do about that, sadly.
Rook a6, pawn a6, queen a6 would be mating, and indeed mate resign because he's going to get mated. And there we have it. Praveen, the first player to get 3-0.
And he should be feeling quite fortunate right now as his position was in trouble. And I see them in the game chat. They both said good game. And then Praveen says, that was a wild game. Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah, he had fun. He had fun with that one, especially after winning, quite a ride. And rook b4, great move in your opponent's time pressure. So congrats to Praveen for starting off 3-0. Speed of Light, will you join him?
Yes. It was a move, rook e3 play to hit the queen on e5, and queen b8 says, thank you, I'm attacking your bishop on a8, and I'm also attacking your rook on b1. You cannot defend both, so thank you for the bishop. And now Black is really up material with a queen and a minor piece for the two rooks.
And we can expect him to join Praveen any minute with 3-0. Very nicely done. Really nice.
And wait, let's go to Annie Wang's game. That's in the Haring tournament, because that one is getting a bit spicier, where there's the bishops on d5, and the last one was knight to g5 for Black, which forces, I think, rook takes e8, otherwise queen h3 check is up. So we saw the trade, and now queen f6, I imagine, is what White wants to do here.
Yeah, and I like the bishop on d5 more than the knight on g5. You predicted that earlier, Robert. But is it enough to win?
It's enough to continue to apply pressure, and that may be enough to win. Maybe objectively, it's only slightly better for White, but I see more ideas for White to play with, and it feels like Black is going to be forced backwards a bit.
Yeah, I agree. And she's played queen to f4, queen e7 played. I'm predicting that she's going to try to get the moves h4 and h5 in. Nicely done by Chess Parakeet, playing quickly. I like that. She doesn't want to further her time pressure, as that could cause her demise.
H4, good looking
Oh,
move.
what?
Just
Power of a point won the game. Remember, we were looking at that one. Alice was in big trouble, but she turned it around and won.
how?
Let's go back and see it. I think Amanda must have tried some kind of tactic that didn't work.
So this queen went to h2. Oh gosh, she just underestimated bishop takes this knight on e5. And if she took with the f pawn, which happened, there was queen g5 check, picking up e3. And if there was d takes, there was d4. So she left her knight on e5 a little bit too long. With I told you that king wanted to be on a2 and not on g1.
Oh, so this bishop g5 move. Yeah, and your king is just getting snagged. Yikes.
I didn't even see that's how it started. The white actually volunteered the pawn up the board, and then bishop takes g5. You take queen takes g5. Uh-oh, this rook is helping to checkmate.
Nicely done. 10-year-old Alice Lee starting the tournament with 3 points. Very impressive. And who will join Alice in the leaders?
Gosh, she stole every single pawn and ended up winning the game. Up a queen for just a rook, and she was able to convert quite easily. What a turnaround in that one. That looked as bad as it could get.
And one player who will be joining her, by the way, is Martha, as she has somehow gone up in exchange. And it's not just an exchange, she's also rolling with her pawns, some very wise pawns to have no impediments to their graceful promotion. It's like all you have to worry about is which one do you want a queen, the e pawn or the d pawn.
And look how this happened, by the way. This bishop came to h4, and bishop e7 looks like a move that just hurts white because of the bishop on h4 hanging, but you have rook takes h5 check, and after king takes h5, then you take on e7. So you give up a rook for a bishop and pawn, and very importantly, d6, d7, d8 equals queen is pretty unstoppable.
Yeah, nicely done, Martha. Great stuff. She's been playing fantastically this event.
She has, and well, rook e5 happened. She won the exchange, and with that, the game. And actually, the game's still going. I apologize. However, it is completely winning for white, and I think her next move is rook takes g5 with check, and then d7, d8 equals queen, check. So Martha's going to win 3-0 score for her. We'll see if Annie Wang can join them there. And any other games that we should. The Nico Checker game, by the way, as we look at it, this should be a draw. However, with the outside pawn, there is still going to be potential for black to win this game and for white to go wrong.
So strap yourself in for some interesting end games here as Annie tries to make some threats here. You know, she just wants to keep the game going. She's got the better minor piece, and her opponent has less than a minute on the clock now, 45 seconds. What's your plan to just keep the game going, Robert?
I just don't see what black is really doing. You know, you're going to make a move like knight f8 or queen e7, but for one thing you are never certain about is there going to be a moment where white can take on e6? Let's say the queen gets to e5. How will that trade hurt or help either side? So I think that white can also play f4 or just decide which pawns to start pushing. Here, the bishop's under attack, so probably like bishop e4 and threaten the h7 pawn. Wait, Jennifer, how do you protect h7?
Yeah, that probably have to go back to e6 and f8.
Or after bishop e4, you're just already threatening
Oh,
that pawn.
it's white's move. Okay. I'm sorry. I was looking very quickly. We did get the 2 results in. 3 results actually. Nico, that game was drawn. And the game with Andrew Hong, he won, as did Martha Samadashvili. So we got all 3 of those results in the bag. And now you're talking to me about Annie Wang's game, about how she can just try to pile up on the H pawn.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at. Wow, I just pulled all those games up for the audience, and Martha's game at the end was particularly brutal with the 2 queens there. And now our focus goes back to Annie, and she plays queen g5 check instead of bishop to e4, which I guess she was worried about f6 and the queen on d7 protecting h7 that way. And so after queen g5, there will not be f6 because the queen covers the square.
Queen g5, king f8 played.
Mm-hmm.
And now, what is she going to do now with her opponent with 30 seconds left on the clock? She's played queen h6 check.
So hoping for king g8, and then she will play bishop e4. There's no more f6 because you take it. Oh no, bishop c6 now.
Bishop c6. And that's going to do it, guys. Annie Wang forcing resignation. Great fight, but Annie Wang got it done, and she gets 3-0 joining the leaders. Nicely, nicely done.
And it's an important lesson that when your opponent has a bishop and you don't, you want to avoid the color of that bishop. So king e8 walked right into this pin. King e7 kept the game going. White, of course, is better with the better minor piece, the better pawn structure. This pawn h7 is a target that you'll need to keep defended. So you can play bishop e4 and just go right after this h7 pawn. But black was still fighting in this position, whereas after king e8, the game ended on the spot.
Yeah, just Chess Parakeet really played great in this game, but the in the end, it's an exhausting day, and it's not surprising to see these types of mistakes. It's funny. I think in early tomorrow morning, you're going to see like a very high level of play, but that last round, it's tough, Robert, and that's part of the game. Stamina.
It certainly is. It's just not easy to play so many long games. Each game today was 70 minutes with a 10-second increment. So you're playing 3 super long games against very strong opposition, and you try your best, you keep on fighting, and then a moment like this happens where after a really nicely played game by Gracie, that's Chess Parakeet, just one move in any other circumstance, she would never play king e8, right? She knows that there's a bishop in there with 30 seconds on your clock. After such an exhausting day, grueling game against Annie here, you make a one move blunder and you're like, all right, Annie was pressing. I got to give her credit. I'll move on and fight back tomorrow. But credit to both players. Annie for kind of squeezing an advantage out of something that didn't look like there would be one, and for Gracie for fending off an international master like this for several hours. I think that both players can be very proud of their performance.
It's wonderful to do the commentary with you for this event and to see the legacy of these events continue on. I mean, the Denker tournament, such a great historic event, the National Girls Tournament of Champions. My friend Richard Schifrin and his wife, Barbara Schifrin, help support this tournament with their generous prize fund. And I was also obviously a huge admirer of Ruth Haring. The strides that have been made in women's and girls chess since her passing just a few years ago, I think would have made her so incredibly happy. As we've seen Annie and Jen and and Carissa, all these young players just increase their level so substantially. So a very fitting event for her memory, and that we were able to make it happen this year with such a field is wonderful to see.
It is. I mean, honestly, it does make me sad thinking about Ruth. She was such a great person, and I had so many good experiences communicating with her. She loved the game of chess, and it's great that we have a tournament in her honor. Same with Sunil. Of course, Sunil is still alive. We spoke to him yesterday, and he said he was almost embarrassed by having a tournament named after him. He did not pay for that name. I know, of course, with universities and things like that, people often donate a lot of money. No, it's recognition of what these people have done for U.S. chess. And of course, Denker, Grandmaster, one of the prominent faces in American chess for so much of the 20th century. And we are very grateful for their legacy. So, Jennifer, I've had a blast covering the action today. It's been exhausting for the players. It's also been pretty tiring for us. And I'm glad we were able to go through these 3 rounds of the Haring, the Denker.
Yeah, it was awesome though. It really went by a lot faster than I would have expected because you're a great commentator, and I echo what you say about Sunil. I mean, he has done so much for U.S. chess. A lot of things that people don't know about, even that might not be so obvious, like some of the work he did with the Sinkfield Cup. Check out the Sinkfield Cup book if you want to see the inside scoop on that. But yeah, I think you'll probably get a lot more insight into Sunil and all his contributions, because tomorrow Hikaru Nakamura is coming into the booth. And how exciting is that? That's also a real blessing for US chess. We get to see so much Hikaru commentary these days. And on this very event, I wonder if the players are going to be a little nervous finding out that Hikaru is going to be doing the commentary tomorrow. I bet they will. I bet they'll be a little more nervous.
I think it can get to you as a player. You're like, whoa, Hikaru's talking about my games and I need to play my best. But ultimately, they should try to refrain from even thinking that way, as it is a distraction and they need to focus on the moves that they can control. And it's been a great day of chess. The players have impressed us, certainly. And we have several players at the top of the leaderboard. We'll see if they'll be able to maintain their leads or if someone like Jennifer Yu can bounce back, or even Carissa Yip, who lost her first game. A lot of action remaining tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Jennifer, for having the call with me. And have a great night, everyone. More chess tomorrow.